Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is AS and welcome to my YouTube channel. I will keep this channel introduction short and sweet because we have a long road ahead when it comes to this video's length. The main focus of this video is The Last of Us Part 2, but we'll also cover past products from the same franchise, as well as what I predict for the series' future. Without further ado, enjoy the video titled Look for the Light Where It Matters, the past, present, and possible future of The Last of Us.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything I have found here, I'm not found by myself. Try and sometimes you'll succeed to make this man of me. All my stolen missing parts I've no need for any more, 'cause I believe, and I believe 'cause I can see our future days of you and me.
The Last of Us Part 2 is in a unique position during today's gaming climax. On one hand, mainstream critics are praising it and placing it on a pedestal as one of the generation's best games. On the other hand, many members of the player base are outright despising the product due to the narrative choices that Naughty Dog's Neil Druckmann and Haley Gross, who are the lead writers, decide to address with the follow-up to what is arguably the PlayStation 3's best title. This divisive nature is something that I have yet to experience as a long-time enthusiast of video games. As a result, I decided to step back, put my feet up, and analyze the impact that The Last of Us Part 2 had on me, after 6 distinct playthroughs. Before I begin my argument, I would like to preface my stance with the following points. Number 1. I played The Last of Us Part 1 on the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4, the Left Behind downloadable content, and of course, The Last of Us Part 2. Number 2, I did not spoil myself from the leaks that were released months before The Last of Us Part 2's launch. Number 3, speaking of spoilers, I will discuss major spoilers for the following pieces of media: Telltale The Walking Dead Season 1, which is a video game from 2012, John Wick, which is a film from 2014, Marvel's Avengers Endgame, which is a film from 2019, Godzilla, which is a film from 2014, Telltale Game of Thrones Episode 1, which is a video game from 2014, The Lion King, which is a film from 1998, and The Godfather, which is a video game from 2006. Obviously, it does not exclude spoilers for The Last of Us Part 1, The Last of Us Part 2, The Last of Us Left Behind, and The Last of Us American Dreams, which is a comic book that was released in 2013. If you do not want to be spoiled for any of these products, please avoid this analysis. Lastly, number 4. Most of the information that I will present to you is entirely subjective. If you agree with my opinion, who am I to judge? If you disagree with my opinion, that is fine and dandy. We can agree to disagree in a respectful manner, and you are always welcome to personally contact me to debate your take on the title and Naughty Dog's story-based direction with The Last of Us Part 2. With that in mind, let us get started. As a writer and an avid fan of movies, I am always fascinated by narrative-based visions that deliberately surprise their fanbase. Telltale's Skybound's The Walking Dead and Freebird Games' To the Moon accomplished this task by telling two of the most engaging narratives in media. The relationship between Lee and Clementine is extraordinary, yet the moment the girl's father figure suddenly gets bitten when he picks up a walkie-talkie from the ground changes the story's dynamic and punches us in the gut. To the Moon's surprise, on the other hand, shows itself by the lack of mainstream recognition. An underrated masterpiece of storytelling in the form of an indie video game, To the Moon is captivating from start to finish, and its ending is more emotional than most stories that are told through video games nowadays. It is the element of deliberate surprise that leaves me with a lasting impression and an aspect that enhances the writer's vision. At a first glance, The Last of Us Part 2 may seem like a typical revenge tale that features several of the characters from the previous title. After close inspection, however, it proves itself to surpass the initial impression. Thankfully, and most importantly, it also includes the feature of a deliberate surprise that transforms the post-apocalyptic tale into anything but a typical quest for vengeance. We will dive into the technicalities with regards to the story's complex nature, as well as the fantastic characterizations of both old and new personnel. If you would like my thoughts in a more concise manner, think about the following 3 points. Number 1, The Last of Us Part 2 is better than The Last of Us Part 1. Number 2, The Last of Us Part 2 offers the best narrative I experienced in 2020. And number 3, I, for one, am looking forward to a possible sequel with The Last of Us Part 3. Even though this video will mainly focus on the second part of Ellie's and Joel's story, it is important to provide you with the context for the series. Let's quickly go back in time to 2013 when the original Last of Us came out on the PlayStation 3. Ellie's and Joel's chemistry set the new standard for AAA games that dare to include a compelling tale. It thoroughly mesmerized people around the world while at the same time adding icing to the cake with a breathtaking soundtrack, serviceable gameplay, and an ending that has been discussed years after the game's initial launch. This praising is rather general. How about I simply review the original game? Okay? No problem. Here is the breakdown of the game's mechanics. Gameplay. The Last of Us, at its core, is a third-person shooter with stealth mechanics. You have several difficulty settings ranging from easy to grounded, which is the hardest. Playing as both Ellie and Joel, you're constantly exploring your environment, gathering supplies, solving basic puzzles with ladders, and crafting new equipment. The game rewards you for going out of your way with the inclusion of supplies and pills, the latter of which allows you to improve certain abilities, more health, faster crafting, etc. Thankfully, you do more than walk in looking around for necessary items. You also need to deal with both human and inhuman opponents. Listening mode adds an interesting playstyle, as it allows you to see enemies through walls and other objects. It is both a blessing and a curse. It helps you to quickly analyze the combat situation and properly overcome it, but it also shows the holes in the shiny armor that is the enemy AI. Zombies mindlessly charge at you and they are easily disposable. The clickers and bloaters are the minor exceptions to the rule, as they will instantly kill you in most cases if they grab you. It adds tension, but as previously stated, listen mode alleviates the stress to a certain degree. The level of enjoyment while fighting the infected cannot be replicated with the humans. They will shoot you and attempt to charge you with a hand-based weapon, but they do not offer much of a challenge. There is a boss fight in the game that constitutes as a cat and mouse sequence with David, but it is not particularly challenging. Grounded mode takes away your ability to see enemies through obstacles, and it substantially improves the game's fun factor, difficulty, and intensity. Overall, the gameplay of The Last of Us is enjoyable, but it does not do anything groundbreaking to make it stand out from other zombie-infested third-person shooters. Music and voice acting. Gustavo Santaolalla leads the charge, and he's absolutely masterful. The soft strumming of a guitar highlights elements of brutality, peace, happiness, and sadness. After the boss fight with David, Ellie proceeds to kill him. She hits him over and over in the head, slowly losing a part of her humanity. Joel makes a save, and throughout their conversation, dialogue is muted, and you hear Gustavo's melody playing in the background. It is a touching scene and one which stuck by me long after the credits rolled.
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
Joel.
It's okay.
As for the voice acting, I cannot praise Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson enough for their portrayals of Joel and Ellie, respectively. Ashley Johnson's first major performance in a video game is a home run. Ellie's portrayed with the type of naivety and curiosity that is perfectly in line with the character's personality. Troy Baker's somber depiction of Joel is top-notch and serves as evidence to Troy Baker's placement as one of the best voice actors in the business. Although there are separate scenes that would convince anyone of Troy's and Ashley's prowess, the scene where Joel finds Ellie in a room of an abandoned house cannot be matched. The shaking in Troy's voice when Ellie mentions Sarah and Ashley's cry of loneliness are something to behold. I cannot picture anyone else in Ellie's and Joel's shoes aside from Ashley Johnson and Troy Baker.
What are you so afraid of? That I'm gonna end up like Sam? I can't get infected. I can take care of myself.
How many close calls have we had?
Well, we seem to be doing all right so far.
And now you'll be doing even better with Tommy.
I'm not her, you know.
What?
Maria told me about Sarah.
Ellie?
And
You are treading on some mighty thin ice here.
I'm sorry about your daughter, Joel. But I have lost people too.
You have no idea what loss is.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
Visuals. Compared to other games on the PlayStation 3, the quality of the game's graphical design cannot be denied. It is an absolute feast for the eyes, with spectacular character models, incredible facial animations, and intriguing details within the level structures. It was PlayStation's final exclusive title for its third console iteration, and it brought out everything the device could muster. If you only need a small proof of its visual fidelity, watch the scene where Joel, Ellie, and Tommy ride to the university and stare at it from the hill. It is a pure treat. Story. We arrived at the meat and potatoes of The Last of Us. It is the primary reason as to why the game is placed in many people's top 10 lists when it comes to engrossing narratives, PlayStation 3 games in general, and the best video games of all time. Here is a quick synopsis of the story. In a post-apocalyptic world, a man, Joel, is tasked with bringing a young girl, Ellie, to a group known as the Fireflies, where they hope to make a cure for the zombie-creating virus off of Ellie's immunity. It is a criminally short summary, but it is the gist of what you can expect from The Last of Us. However, you will not be able to foresee the moments of shock, laughter, and some of the best characterizations I have ever seen in a video game. Ellie's and Joel's character development throughout the game is incredible. Joel transforms from an individual who does not care about this random girl and solely focuses on survival to a man who treats this random girl as his second daughter. Ellie concurrently alters from an innocent girl to a mature child who questions what is deemed right or wrong by her standards and others as well. The side characters Tess, Bill, Marlene, etc. also attribute to the progression of the pair's journey in meaningful ways. I cannot pinpoint a character that did not have a purpose in the game's tale, which is rare in today's landscape of video game-based stories. I would like to take a moment to discuss the game's ending. Although they find the Fireflies, Joel takes it upon himself to carry Ellie back to Tommy in the community of Jackson, because the procedure to construct the cure would kill Ellie. His decision to sacrifice humanity's long-term survival is understandable, but at the same time, selfish. Vaccines are not perfect, and there would always be a possibility that the cure would have a short-term success, but in my opinion, the maintenance of a species is more important than the death of a single member of said species. Aside from that train of thought, the ending was very well executed. When I first witnessed it, I thought that Ellie doubted Joel's promise that he told her the truth. After reaching the finale for the third and fourth times, I was not sure, which I appreciate because it leaves the door open for interpretation and discussion. It is this exact reason why I adore the ending to Bioshock Infinite. I will not spoil it, but I stared at the screen for a full minute once the credits rolled, and the talks that ensued with my friends were meaningful and informative. The Last of Us' story deserves all the perpetual praise, and I would recommend it to anyone, regardless if you are okay with the inclusion of the living dead. Multiplayer. In addition to the main single-player content, The Last of Us offers a surprisingly fun multiplayer component. It includes 3 different modes: Supply Raid, which is the standard team deathmatch, Survivors, which is a typical deathmatch routine, and Interrogation, which requires each team to interrogate their opponents for the location of lockboxes. I will shamelessly admit my lack of skill with the multiplayer portion of the game, but it does not change the adrenaline you receive from either mode. There is a reason why The Last of Us' multiplayer is still played to this day through the remastered PlayStation 4 version. At the end of the day, The Last of Us receives 95% from me. It is exceptional at almost everything it sets out to accomplish, but the gameplay is playable at best. I was grateful to learn a year later about an additional piece of content. Titled Left Behind, the 2-hour experience is conveniently divided into 2 parts, even though you play as Ellie the entire time. During the first period, you are tasked with finding a first aid kit in a mall after Joel gets injured in the original game. The other time period consists of your relationship with Riley, a cheeky female who you befriend during your time at the military school. The latter is set before the first game, but after the associated comic book, American Dreams, which we will discuss shortly. The division here is interesting because the former focuses on maintaining the same gameplay mechanics, visuals, and sound design as the original, while the latter fleshes out Ellie's character and provides a backstory on her mannerism and her initial bite from an infected enemy. Ellie's quest to nurse Joel from his wounds is interesting, but it lacks any character development for Ellie, and a story arc for that matter. If Ellie had to deal with a patrolling group from David's camp, for example, it would have provided context to some survival practices from David's community. Nevertheless, I still managed to enjoy my time through Ellie's trip to the abandoned mall. Thankfully, my criticism of the downloadable content story quickly evaporates while accompanying Riley on her adventure. The interactions between Ellie and Riley nicely showcase the importance of finding the light in complete darkness. The world is bleak, and the request does not give them hope for the end of the pandemic. However, the conversations resemble how society used to function prior to the outbreak. My favorite moment of Left Behind happens at the mall, where Ellie and Riley manage to operate a merry-go-round. It does not only introduce Ellie's book of puns, but the emotion that is conveyed through the characters' peaceful interactions and Gustavo's execution of Together are moving.
This looks fancy.
Yeah!
You ready for this?
What are we doing? Whoa, 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 whoa. Riley, come here!
No, you got this. Go.
What the heck? This is awesome. Oh, man. Come on, get up here, sit next to me.
All right, wait up. No.
man.
I just got on.
Live!
Phooey.
Well, I loved it, so there.
Left Behind's conclusion beautifully depicts the moment when both Riley and Ellie were bitten by the infected enemies, directly referring to the story that Ellie told Joel at the end of The Last of Us. Ellie's and Riley's relationship elevated my enjoyment from this piece of downloadable content, even though I still had a good time with the gameplay. Left Behind receives a score of 90% from me. The final content that adds further backstory to The Last of Us came in the form of a comic book. Taking place prior to the downloadable content, 2013's American Dream serves as Ellie's first contact with Riley, Marlene, and the Fireflies. Furthermore, the origin of Ellie's shiv is revealed, as well as the name of Ellie's maternal mother, Anna. The new information that we received from American Dreams is intriguing, no doubt. However, it did not confirm a question that I have had on my mind since I played The Last of Us back in 2013. Are Ellie's parents dead? Anna's letter to Ellie, which you can read through a collectible in the original game, suggests that she died during childbirth. Nevertheless, I follow a simple rule when it comes to the character's death. If I do not see it, there's a possibility the character is alive. This point will be used during the discussion about Naughty Dog's latest product. In the meantime, I will confirm that American Dreams is a worthy supplemental material to the lore of The Last of Us. If you have not read it, I suggest that you give it a chance without a second thought.
I'll soon be free from earthly trial. This body red in the old churchyard. I'll drop this cross of self-denial and go singing home to God. I'm going there to see my Savior. I'm going there, no more to roam. I'm just a going over Jordan. I'm just a going over home. I'm just a going over Jordan. I'm just a going over home. I'm just a going.
We have now covered enough groundwork to shift our focus to The Last of Us Part 2. I mentioned in the video's introduction that, in my opinion, the sequel is better than the first game. With that in mind, let me start my argument by reviewing one of the best video games of 2020. In a similar fashion to Joel's and Ellie's first venture into Naughty Dog's post-apocalyptic world, I will break down every aspect, leaving the narrative to the end due to its controversial nature. Gameplay. On its surface, Part 2 does not deviate much from Part 1. You fight human and infected enemies, collect resources, and craft equipment. Fortunately, there are several steps of improvement that greatly refine the game's action and stealth set pieces. The process of crafting and skill building have been streamlined, further rewarding players for exploration and enabling them to personally customize their playstyle. If you prefer to sneak by enemies, you might focus on faster movement while crawling. If you rather focus on firepower, you could craft explosive arrows. You can earn every skill through the New Game Plus feature, but the first playthrough will be specifically tailored to you. In relation to playing stealthily, there are two feats of advancement from the original game. On one hand, the artificial intelligence for the human opponents is fantastic. Your opponents will regularly flank you, call out their friends' names upon their deaths, and inform their peers about your location. It is especially evident while fighting the Scars, who communicate via whistling. It is an ingenious method of communication and it leaves you vulnerable to their train of thought. Moreover, the human enemies are equipped with dogs, which can track your scent and force you to be on the move. These two touches to the artificial intelligence increase the fun factor of the game tenfold, particularly when playing on the hard difficulty settings. There are three smaller improvements that are also brought to the table: jump, dodge, and prone. These techniques aid Part 2's action and stealth sequences, respectively. During encounters, jumping with the X button and dodging with the L1 button are extremely helpful to avoid incoming fire or hand-based attacks. The latter is a lifesaver in situations where you're out of ammunition. Crawling while holding the circle button comes into play when you attempt to hide in grass or traverse under objects with holes. If it is carefully executed, this capability enables you to avoid most combat situations. The last point about the gameplay heavily distinguishes the two playable characters, Ellie and Abby. The returning character from Part 1 now has an unbreakable shiv, which eliminates the hassle of constantly crafting shivs. Upgraded shivs also speed up the killing animation and, in return, benefits the pacing of Ellie's gameplay. Abby does not have the same ability and requires more caution during encounters with the infected, but she's formidable during hand-to-hand combat. Both characters are entertaining from a gameplay standpoint. My sole complaint is the boss fight in the hospital with Abby, which resembles a battle you would see in Resident Evil 5 and 6. Sound design and voice acting. One of the most memorable aspects of the original game was the musical score, which plays Gustavo Santaolalla at the helm. Fortunately, he returns in the sequel with another set of powerful yet subtle melodies. There's not much to add here. If you enjoyed the music in Part 1, Part 2 soundtrack will make you feel right at home. As far as voice acting is concerned, Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson continue to steal the show with their performances as Joel and Ellie respectively. Furthermore, both actors received their time to shine with a song, both of which perfectly set the tone of the relationship between the singer and the listener. As a matter of fact, Ashley Johnson's performance of Take On Me by a-ha is my favorite moment in gaming during my time with the PlayStation 4.
Talking away. I don't know what I'm to say. I'll say it anyway. Today's another day to find you shying away. I'll be coming for you, love, okay? Take on me. Take me on. I'll be gone in a day or two. Needless to say, I'm odds and ends, but I'll be stumbling away, slowly learning that life is okay. Say after me, it's no better to be safe than sorry. Take on me. Take me on. I'll be gone in a day or two. In a day or two.
In addition to Troy and Ashley, Laura Bailey joins The Last of Us's lore as Abby. The character's execution is commendable and proves why Laura is among the best voice actresses in the industry. The moment that Abby cries out due to her father's death struck me very deeply. It helped with believability when it comes to Abby's decision to ultimately kill Joel.
Is he still in the fucking building? Abby.
No!
Abby, don't look.
Dad! Dad! No! No!
Visuals. Earlier this year, I played Rockstar's Red Dead Redemption 2. At that time, I could not pinpoint a game that matched Arthur Morgan's adventure in terms of visuals. Back in June, I completed The Last of Us Part 2, and I can confirm that it contains the most realistic visuals I have ever seen in a video game to this day. The wildlife and lighting are spectacular, the infected zombies are terrifying, and the facial animations of the human characters set the bar high for the last games that will be released on the PlayStation 4. I will be frank with you and say that it did not take long for the game to impress me with its graphical fidelity. The moment where Joel and Tommy stood on top of a hill and overlooked Jackson blew me away, and it happened within the first 10 minutes of the game. The same expression of awe occurred in the first scene at the farm, where Ellie and Dina's child sit on a tractor and stare at the field. Both segments were breathtaking and solidified The Last of Us Part 2 as the most visually stunning video game on Sony's last generation console. Story: The Last of Us Part 2 is set 5 years after Part 1. Ellie and Joel are living peacefully in Jackson, where a tragedy strikes and Joel is murdered by Abby, a girl of which you take control early in the game. At first, you are not certain about Abby's motive to kill Ellie's father figure, and it prompts Ellie and Dina to set off on a revenge quest against Abby's group. Halfway through the game, however, you switch over to Abby and learn that Joel killed her father, who was the surgeon you butchered at the end of Part 1. From that point onward, the game bounces back and forth between Abby and Ellie, showcasing the game's themes in a dynamic, engaging, and heart-wrenching journey that left me speechless by the conclusion. You just heard a summary of Part 2's plot, but there are many layers that must be unraveled in our analysis. Let us start with the 5 dominant characters in Naughty Dog's most recent outing. Dina, who is played by Shannon Woodward. Ellie's love interest. Dina is a strong-willed character who deeply cares about her partner, and she's not shy about expressing distaste for Ellie's most eyebrow-raising decisions. As the deaths of Abby's friends start to pile up, Dina is by Ellie's side, calming her down and reminding her that she cannot be consumed by purposeless rage. Meanwhile, she also serves as a time buffer for Ellie's quest due to her pregnancy from Jesse, one of Jackson's leaders. Even though Ellie and Dina depart from one another towards the end of the game, it does not alter Dina's positive influence on Ellie, as the humanity of Joel's daughter figure slowly evaporates away. Abby, who is played by Laura Bailey. The character that brings out the rage and ire from many of the original game's fans, Abby is Ellie's antagonist and the person responsible for Joel's death. Interestingly muscular, she is initially portrayed as a self-serving soldier whose main goal is killing Tommy's brother. Once you switch to her perspective, it is revealed that she is a part of a larger group where her care for her own peers is showcased. Her humorous interactions with Manny, her trust issues with Mel, and her romantic scenes with Owen flesh out Abby's character. They transform her general depiction from a ruthless soldier into a human being who will do whatever it takes to protect the herd. Contradictory to Ellie's character development, Abby's sense of selflessness escalates through the end, where she must protect an unconscious love from someone who you, as a player, were conditioned to love during The Last of Us Part 1. By the time the credits roll, Abby suffers some losses in the form of health and friends, but gains hindsight into the need of protecting someone who you were taught to hate for a long time. Joel, played by Troy Baker. Ellie's father figure, Joel experiences the saddest character arc in the game, as the karma from his decisions throughout the ending of Part 1 comes back full circle. On one hand, his relationship with Ellie halts when she discovers his lie about the Fireflies and ceases communication with him for a certain time. On the other hand, Joel's choice to kill the lead surgeon in the hospital commences a domino effect that encourages Abby to train and kill Joel in an act of vengeance. Joel's interactions with Ellie did not fully recover prior to his death, which makes his demise even more tragic. Nevertheless, he leaves a lasting impression on Ellie through flashbacks, PTSD-related segments, and sudden images, the latter of which help Ellie regain part of her humanity. Our time with Joel is extremely brief, but his character is undoubtedly one of the franchise's strongest assets. Ellie, played by Ashley Johnson. Part 2's heroine, yet Abby's personal antagonist after a certain scene in the game. Ellie's entrance into adulthood is intriguing. Her sexuality is explored through her relationship with Dina, and her friendship with Joel hits rock bottom when she finds out that he lied about what transpired during the hospital scene at the end of Part 1. Her anger at Joel is understandable, yet she tries to reconcile with him after he stands up for her at the party. In a horrific fashion, Ellie realizes that she waited too long to make up with Joel as he gets killed by Abby. That moment scars Ellie and gives her post-traumatic stress disorder, evident by the segment in the barn where she imagines Joel crying out for her in the basement.
Ellie? Hey, Ellie. Look at me. It's okay. You're home. You're home. Breathe, breathe. Okay, I'm gonna take him, okay? Come on.
Her sense of reason deteriorates throughout the game, and this negative impact on her life harms her relationships with Jesse and Dina. Any hope for Ellie's rationality and selflessness almost disappear, but her decision to spare Abby during the final fight preserves some hope. It helps us believe that regardless of Ellie's next adventure, there's still a part of her that will remind us of the Ellie who stole pornographic material from Bill and the Ellie who danced with Dina at Jackson's party. Tommy, played by Jeffrey Pierce, Joel's brother and one of Jackson's leaders. Tommy's character is filled with foreshadowing that eventually leads to his moral downfall, as well as the decline of Joel's relationship with Ellie. His advice for Joel with regards to avoiding a decision about the event in the hospital with Ellie results in her own discovery of the truth. Its impact could have been less severe had Joel opted to be honest with Ellie earlier in the game. As far as the foreshadowing is concerned, it comes in two forms. First, the only flashback with Tommy consists of a shooting session with a sniper rifle. It reflects a sniper-based boss battle with Abby, which places Tommy in the role of the sniper. Secondly, Tommy initially told Ellie that she should not go after Abby too quickly. He proceeds to defy his own talking point and leaves Jackson to chase after Abby's group. This decision signifies the beginning of Tommy's tumble into darkness, and it culminates in the type of behavior that alienates himself from Ellie and Dina. Tommy attempted to lead Ellie away from Abby towards the end of her initial portion, but he is sadly the only individual in the narrative who ends up in a negative light. The characters themselves are important, but the interactions among them lead to memorable scenes and important story progression. With that in mind, I would like to reference some of my favorite moments from The Last of Us Part 2. Take on Me. I cannot further stress how much I adore this scene. It is not easily encountered through the narrative. If you want to watch the scene, you need to explore the music store as Ellie during the open world section of Seattle. Nevertheless, the actual performance by Ashley Johnson of a-ha's classic is spectacular. Furthermore, the interpretation of the song as a plea to accept someone with their highlights and faults directly represents the relationship between Ellie and Dina. Ellie must be content with Dina's commanding attitude, while Dina sacrifices her well-being to be with Ellie. It is an incredibly moving scene, and I regularly listen to Johnson's cover while driving my car, or better yet, completing this video. Trip to the synagogue. This is a partially biased pick because I am Jewish. I love the design of the synagogue as well as Dina's commentary on the Torah, God and the Jewish calendar, identified by the number 5774. Putting my bias aside, though, I believe that Dina's statements about prayer transcend the segment at the Holy Temple. The concept of prayer can be defined as a strong hope or wish. It makes sense because a typical prayer would wish or hope for something. I pray for my father's health, I pray to win next month's lottery, etc. Since Dina is a strong believer in prayer, it is particularly surprising to me that Dina does not wait for Ellie when she goes to California in search of Abby. Personally, it tells me that Dina lost hope in Ellie's redemption, and she must now look out for her own safety as well as JJ's health. The connection between the scene at the synagogue and Dina's final narrative decision is powerful, and it would be interesting to see the dynamic between Ellie and Dina at Part 3, if that is the route that Naughty Dog chooses to take in the future. and assuming that Ellie returns to Jackson from the farm. Museum flashback. The first flashback of The Last of Us Part 2 is brilliant. Aside from bringing back Joel to develop his relationship with Ellie and the joke-based banter throughout the level, it reminded me about the beginning of Part 1 when Sarah, Joel's daughter, gave him a watch for his birthday. The roles are reversed during the flashback when Joel takes Ellie to dinosaur and astronomy museums to celebrate her birthday. It is a touching sequence of events and cements Ellie's depiction as Joel's current daughter figure. Undoubtedly, Ellie's imaginary trip to space was the best aspect of the flashback, and it made me smile the entire time.
Happy birthday, kiddo.
What is this?
This is a thing that took a mighty effort to find. Take it. Close your eyes. It'll be worth it.
Okay.
Seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
I do okay.
Are you fucking kidding me?
You're welcome, kiddo.
The final flashback. The Last of Us Part 1 forced me to shed a tear early on with Sarah's death. Part 2 saves this luxury to the end. During the final flashback, Ellie meets with Joel at his porch to talk about what transpired at Jackson's party. They peacefully start the conversation but proceed to discuss Joel's decision to possibly sacrifice humanity for Ellie's sake. Joel stands his ground. It quickly crumbles after Ellie insinuates that she may never be able to forgive him. He starts to tear up and take short breaths. That moment broke me on two levels. On one hand, Troy Baker's performance and the roller coaster on which he takes the player before and after Ellie's agreement to give the relationship another shot is very emotional. On the other hand, it made me realize that it was only the beginning of the process for Ellie's forgiveness, which never saw a conclusion because Abby killed Joel. The flashback brought Ellie's cycle of vengeance full circle by demonstrating the idea of forgiveness through Joel's vision in that segment, and Ellie's eyes during the final fight against Abby. It was nicely executed and leads to an intriguing question. Now that Ellie supposedly received closure for Joel's death, will she start a new chapter in her life, or will she seek atonement for betraying Tommy and Dina?
You're such an asshole.
I'm not trying to.
I was supposed to die in that hospital. My life would have fucking mattered. But you took that from me.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
Yeah. I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But I would like to try.
I'd like that.
Okay. I'll see you around.
Yep.
I mentioned early in our discussion of the narrative that it beautifully portrays the game's themes. Even so, I have not specifically identified the ideas that The Last of Us Part 2 explores through Ellie's and Abby's adventure. Let us do it right now. Cycle of Revenge. If you have read mainstream and user reviews for The Last of Us Part 2, you will notice this commonly mentioned theme. It is true. Although it does not take place in a perfect order, the cycle of revenge plays a dominant role in the narrative and includes 5 phases. Joel kills Abby's father, Abby kills Joel, Ellie kills Abby's friends, Abby spares Ellie because of Lev's plea, and Ellie spares Abby due to remembering Joel and the procedure of forgiveness. The first phase is not told to the players until the second half of the game, which makes the third phase completely justified and understandable to the player base. Once we learn about Abby's father, her decision to train and kill Joel is understandable. You do not have to agree with her choice, but it is a choice that stems from personal loss. As far as the stage of forgiveness on both Ellie's and Abby's parts is concerned, both characters have different reasons to partake in that level of the grievance procedure. Abby spares Ellie because Lev called her name and gave her a look that told her that is enough.
Stop! She had nothing to do with this. She's pregnant. Good. Abby!
It is reminiscent of Ellie's battle against David in Part 1, where Ellie finished him with a blade. At that moment, Ellie was consumed with rage. Then, Joel grabbed her away from David and gave her a look that said, "That is enough."
Stop! Stop!
Fucking touch me!
It's okay. It's me. It's me. It's me. Look. It's me.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
Both David and Ellie were defeated, and both Joel and Lev reminded their companions that they cannot let their emotions take over their rationale. If it happened, Ellie and Abby would become the same people they defeated, and they will never receive a proper closure. Perspective. As part of a behind-the-scenes video, Neil Druckmann, one of the lead writers behind The Last of Us Part 2, says the following: "So much about The Last of Us is the perspective of the group. No one group is bad, or one person is bad, or good for that matter. It is not only true, but it applies to our lives in general. Imagine a 40-year-old man who breaks into a pharmacy at night to steal medicine. If you analyze the situation without the proper context, you will only be exposed to a single perspective that labels the man as a criminal. However, what if I told you that he and his family live under a bridge, have no money, and his daughter has a 105-degree fever? You may still disagree with his decision to break into the store, but you would at least understand that the father's decision has a noble backstory. If we shift gears to the video game in question, the principle of perspective takes center stage. If you played part 1 prior to part 2, which I hope is the case, you are conditioned to believe that Ellie is a good person and the sequel's protagonist. The truth, though, reveals that there are no heroes and villains in this world. It is all a matter of a viewpoint. Ellie is Abby's antagonist and vice versa. Abby may have killed Joel, but would she have pursued Joel if he did not murder her father? Would Joel have killed her father had Jerry, Abby's dad, not threatened him with a knife? These are questions that will never receive an answer, but they provide us with a different perspective. It is this concept that engrossed me in Lev's backstory. He is a transgender who was forced by his community to marry one of the males in the group. His mother approved of the settlement, but Lev shaved his head and escaped the village. When he returns to confront his mother, she allegedly attacks him, and he has no choice but to kill his mother. This short narrative depicts Lev's mother as an evil individual, but can you completely place the fault on her shoulder? She grew in a society that depicted transgenders as an unacceptable form of life. It is all she knew at the time. I am not condoning her attempt to kill Lev, but it places matters into perspective, does it not? Let me reiterate it before we continue. You do not have to agree with every perspective. In Abby's case, however, I believe that her choice to take Joel's life is justified. The last dissection of the story as part of the review focuses on its ending. It received mixed reactions, and the following 2 criticisms are brought to the table. Ellie should have killed Abby, and Ellie loses everything while Abby does not lose anything. We will address the complaints at a later point in this video. Right now though, I would like to express my take on the ending, as well as why I like it. The final bout pits Ellie and Abby against each other while you take control of the former. You initially find Abby being crucified on the beach and decide to cut her down. Although the image of a beaten Joel tips Ellie towards her decision to fight Abby, I think she always had that mentality once she ventured off to California. I believe she cut her down because she wanted to beat her fairly while at the same time giving her hope and promptly taking it away. The fight happens. Ellie gets the upper hand and proceeds to choke the life out of Abby. Suddenly, a moment pops into Ellie's mind. Joel playing the guitar. She immediately stops the fight afterwards and allows Abby and Lev to escape. In my opinion, Ellie stops fighting Abby because of Joel. I referenced the fight between Ellie and David earlier, but it has a purpose here as well. Joel stops Ellie from continuously beating up David after he dies. He does not want her to become a killer like him. It is the same case here. Moreover, the moment that stops the fight references the last flashback, where Ellie takes initiative to start the mental healing process and forgive Joel for potentially robbing her of a lifelong purpose. At the very least, she wants to forgive him for lying to her about what happened in the end of part 1. She does not necessarily have to completely agree with him, but it will allow them to find closure on the matter. Ellie stops the fight for a similar reason. She will never be able to fully forgive Abby for what she did to Joel. Nevertheless, it is the only way she will receive closure. In her mind, she should have been able to save him. She failed. If she kills Abby, it is very possible that she will have the PTSD nightmares that haunt her in the farm. Allowing Abby to escape is the only solution when it comes to finding peace and eliminating those moments of anxiety from the scene in the basement. When it comes to The Last of Us Part 2, most of the player base have a consensus when it comes to the title's gameplay, visuals, sound design, and music. We agree that the combat and stealth systems have improved since Part 1, and the presentation is top-notch. As you can tell, I left out the title's narrative on purpose because it is very divisive. Some people did not like the fact that Joel died, or how he died. Some people outright did not like Abby. Based on my critique, you know where I stand. Nevertheless, The Last of Us Part 2 gives you further hints to the direction Naughty Dog took with the game through 2 songs that made appearance in Ellie's and Abby's adventure, or at least the promotional material for said adventure. The first song is Future Days by Pearl Jam. Beautifully performed by Troy Baker, this tune's first line foreshadows Joel's opinion on Ellie, as well as his death's impact on his daughter figure.
If I ever were to lose you, and surely lose myself.
As we have seen from the flashbacks with Joel, he holds Ellie in high regard. More importantly, he does not want to lose her, just like he lost his own daughter Sarah. Unfortunately, it almost reaches the point when Ellie catches Joel in his lie and takes a break from interacting with him. We did not know the true effect of the separation until the last flashback of the game, where Troy Baker's performance shows Joel's ecstatic reaction to Ellie's suggestion that the relationship can be slowly restored to its original positive momentum. The song's introduction also leaves an impression on Ellie's mental and physical health throughout the story. Ellie and Joel ran into some obstacles, but they were eventually comfortable enough to converse with each other. Once Ellie loses Joel, she becomes a shell of her former self. It begins when Ellie tries to reach the door of Joel's house and her hand shakes, and it gradually develops into an obsession for revenge. The PTSD moment in the farm further proves Ellie's breakdown. We listened to Pearl Jam's song early in the game, but it sets the tone for Ellie's and Joel's characters. The second song is Through the Valley by Sean James. The first trailer of The Last of Us Part 2 was revealed at E3 2016. It took everyone by surprise and surpassed expectations. It includes a rendition of Through the Valley by none other than Ashley Johnson. This song is included in the retail game as part of the end credits, and it includes 2 specific lines that are extremely vital to Ellie's and Abby's characters. I fear no evil because I am blind to it all. I can't walk on the path of the right because I'm wrong. The first line reflects Ellie's and Abby's rage-fueled journeys of vengeance. In both scenarios, the characters did not care who stood in their way. Regardless of the dangerous path, their goal was clear: kill the person who wronged them. Nobody tried to stop Abby, but she wanted to take a risk during your first session by going into Jackson and finding Joel. Dina and Jesse attempted to sway Ellie away from her quest of vengeance, but they failed, and it resulted in Jesse's death and Dina's disconnect from Ellie in general. When it comes to the second line, there's a connection between it and the fight on the beach between Ellie and Abby. According to Joel's daughter figure, the path to the right would have ended with Abby's death. As soon as she sees a picture of Joel on the porch, she realized that she can no longer walk on the path because she was wrong. The real righteous path was designed to find closure for Ellie's guilt on Joel's death, and the end of the road required forgiveness towards Abby. It is why we do not experience any more PTSD moments through Ellie after that fight, and why Ellie finally gained back a part of her humanity that was lost since Joel's demise. Throughout our discussion about The Last of Us Part 2, I did not mention anything negative about Naughty Dog's recent product. Even though the game earns a 100% from me, it does not mean that it is perfect. Nothing in this world is perfect. There are some aspects that could have used more polish. In that case, why did I give Part 2 a perfect score? Let me explain myself. If a game receives a 100% from me, it means that the positive aspects nail it out of the park to the point that they completely overshadow anything negative about the title. Several games, movies, and TV shows have been given this grade from me, including Dreams, which is a video game from 2020, Whiplash, which is a movie from 2014, and the first season of Altered Carbon, which is a TV show from 2018. Before I discuss the ways in which The Last of Us Part 2 could have been a better product, let us talk about other people's criticisms for the game. We will look at different user reviews, as well as dissect specific common complaints and decide if they are valid or invalid. The reactions to Ellie's and Abby's adventures have been outstanding for good and bad reasons. The latter intrigues me because I'm not sure which narrative did the people who heavily criticized the game expected to experience. I believe that the expected story would have been another attempt at a cure by Ellie and Joel while traveling once again across the United States. If that is true, it would have mostly been a rehash of the narrative from The Last of Us Part 1. It is besides the point. This portion of the video should not cover hypotheticals. Therefore, let us take away attention from my personal review of the game and talk about what others think about The Last of Us Part 2. Here are 8 reviews from Metacritic, shortened for the sake of pacing. 2 are positive, 3 are mixed, and 3 are negative. They should give you a good idea of the complaints that we will inspect. The first positive review is from Jamie Bagg, who says, Part 2 is a major technical and design milestone in video gaming. It doesn't just have visual fidelity, consistency, and the most realistic human animation to date. It has reached the level of polish that further suspends my disbelief in the world and be fully immersed and invested in its powerful drama. Most importantly, it has the balls to be different. It has the guts to actually take advantage of the form of video game interactivity and put gamers into the shoes of characters in fatal conflict, and to fundamentally challenge how we experience and feel the narrative. The second review is from Paul E. Men, who says, It's not just about revenge, its consequences and effects, but also about the fact that violence only creates more violence. Now let's move on to the mixed reviews. The first mixed review is by JackBones92, who says, As someone who is normally a fan of Naughty Dog games and the original Last of Us, I feel this game is a slap in the face. If you enjoyed the first game because of the story, characters, and relationships, this game is not for you. Due to some questionable storyline choices, the game feels like a slog to get through and tries to force its players into a middle school ethics class rather than engross us in an enthralling story. The second review is by WBWJKBW, who says, While The Last of Us Chapter 2 does offer extraordinary good environments, occasionally strong plot, better gameplay than the original, and a brutal atmosphere, it is very often overshadowed by the failure of the very thing it promises, story. Character logic and decision making is often sacrificed in order to push a certain idea or themes, or at the worst of times, the plot, which in the process makes the story seem significantly more absurd than it should. Furthermore, there are a few instances of character development built up in the last game only to be completely ignored in this one. The last mixed review is by TD Unity, who says, The way the story unfolds is confusing, forgettable, and downright infuriating at points. I think the idea was great, however the order in which it is presented to you only made me feel less invested as the game went on. It retcons beloved characters, doing complete 180 on their personalities in ways that go beyond subversion into alien skin suit territory. The new characters that the game attempted to make me empathize with were unlikable for multiple reasons, even to the point where I would take more risks in combat, not valuing their lives as highly. Finally, let's get to the negative reviews, the first of which is by Yurizen212, who says, Good music, great visual style, the average gameplay, but the plot is terrible, especially Abby's line, change the screenwriter. The second review is by Hell Speller, who says, Story is utterly disgusting. Characters lost all their charm, intelligence, and personality. Naughty Dog just threw an overload of free violence and told us we are supposed to feel bad. Watch how this game will be used to justify video game violence afterwards. I feel bad for half of the studio who was shut down for speaking up against this piece of crap, on the back of them being anti-trans, when it was just about the scenario. And the way Sony forces reviewers to give it good score and silence the others is making me sick. There is no philosophy here, there is no SJW crap. It is just terribly bad writing and thinking. The third negative review is by Matrix Rebel, who says, I enjoyed the game for about 2 hours into it. Then it happens. Death is understandable in a game with an apocalyptic setting. It can be sad but still elicit a positive experience to the player. In The Last of Us Part 2 though, it felt unnecessarily rushed. like someone could not wait to get rid of one of the characters. Then, to make matters worse, you must play as the character who ended such a beloved character from the first game. The theme of revenge is done relatively like any other game or movie, and it does not really make the player feel much excitement to see what happens next. The ending leaves you with nothing, and worse, it tarnishes the legacy and choices made by the end of the first game. As I stated earlier in the video, The Last of Us Part 2's narrative is the game's most divisive aspect. I presented 8 reviews, and 6 of them criticized the plot. With that being said, it is now time to conduct what I consider to be the most intriguing part of this video, an analysis of the complaints. Some of them were illustrated in the Metacritic reviews, while others have been expressed online and among my peers. I will conduct it as respectable as possible, and if you are an individual that stands by these claims, we can agree to disagree. Here we go. Number 1. Misdirection before the game's release. When spoilers for The Last of Us Part 2 were leaked online, many individuals noticed a major change from what was allegedly advertised about the title. Ellie is not the only playable character. As you play through the retail game, a few other alterations are noted. First, Joel is switched with Jesse during the scene where they are prepared to take a vehicle as Ellie tries to escape. Secondly, Joel looks older in the third flashback where Ellie finally catches his lie about the concluding events for Part 1. Thirdly, the trailers that showcased a major character's death included a gunshot, whereas the full narrative replaced it with the swing of a golf club.
Get off me! Please stop! No! Joel, get up. Joel, fucking get up! Please stop! Please don't shoot! Joel, please get up!
Lastly, the clips that displayed the open world roaming of Seattle only showed Ellie, but Dina accompanies her in the final game. In general, the complaint here focuses on misleading information and misdirection. It is true that specific details from the trailers to the full game were switched, but they are not as big of a deal as people make it out to be, for one key reason. When it comes to misdirection, not only have there been instances in The Last of Us' franchise where the same degree of misinformation occurred and people did not complain, but other franchises committed a much worse crime in that regard. In Part 1, gameplay footage from the trailers depicted Joel as the only playable character, yet players realized upon release that you can also control Ellie. According to the Grounded documentary, reviewers were not allowed to reveal that you can play as Ellie before the release of The Last of Us Part 1. Why did people not complain about it? I'll give you another example on a smaller scale. During the first trailer at E3 2016 for The Last of Us Part 2, Ellie is seen with her hand shaken before she plays the guitar. The scene in that video does not happen at all in the full game, but the hand movement is replicated in the game before she grabs the theater's front door after killing Nora. It is a change from the trailer to the full game. Why does nobody mention it? This complaint seems like nitpicking to me. I said that other franchises have committed the sin of misdirection and misinformation worse than The Last of Us Part 2, and I have the perfect example. In 2011, a cinematic trailer for a game called Dead Island was released, and it is still one of the most engrossing trailers of all time. The invoked emotions are spectacular, and it gave you the impression that the product will be a heart-wrenching dive into the typical post-apocalyptic world of zombies. When the full game released the same year, it was criticized by everyone as a generic zombie game with unmemorable characters and a mundane narrative. The only similarity between the retail title and the first trailer was the theme of a post-apocalyptic world. Everything else changed. Compared to Last of Us Part 2, Techland's game is the real source of misdirection and misinformation. Number 2. Joel was killed. This is the plot point that left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths about the game. Serving as one of the lead characters in Part 1, many people liked Joel. They were angry and heartbroken that he was killed by an unknown girl at the time. as well as the fact that he was taken out early in the game. As a result, they immediately dismissed the plot and did not give Naughty Dog a chance to use that to elevate Ellie's, Tommy's, and Abby's characters. The main disappointment stems from the premature death of one of the series' main characters, and a disrespectful one. We will discuss the latter comment in a moment. For now, let us focus on the former. Killing off a main character, let alone early, is acceptable if it is done correctly. In Joel's case, I wholeheartedly stand by my statement when I say that it works. His demise sets the tone for the entire game and provides a reason for Ellie to go out on her adventure of vengeance. Some people call it a moment of shock value, and I completely disagree. A death for the sake of shock value is one that you forget shortly after it happens. We think about Joel's fate from the moment that it happens until the end of the game and beyond. It was a sad and depressing scene, but it was done for the sake of greasing the narrative wheel, as well as Ellie's commence into a downward spiral of moral development. It is interesting to me then that many people were outraged at that scene, yet they were completely fine when a main character is snuffed out in other video games and forms of media. Let us talk about 2 movies and 2 video games. We will start with a film that everyone has seen or should have seen by now, The Lion King from 1994. Disney's classic has been a staple in animated films for years. Its story is funny but also emotional at the same time. One of the most moving scenes comes early on when Mufasa, the king, sadly dies from an attack that was perpetrated by his brother Scar. Afterwards, you watch the ruler's son, Simba, run to his corpse and attempt to wake him up. It was a tearjerker for sure, and yet nobody said anything negative about one of the main characters' deaths.
Long live the king.
We will transition from here to a more recent movie, Godzilla from 2014. The trailers portrayed Bryan Cranston as the film's protagonist. Nevertheless, he dies exceedingly early. Some people raised an eyebrow about the misinformation from the pre-release footage, but I did not hear anyone be upset about his death. If you would like some examples from video games, I have you covered. In the first episode of Telltale Game of Thrones from 2014, Ethan Forrester was built up to be the leader of this house, and while the story progressed, he even came face to face with Ramsay Bolton, one of the game's and show's most terrifying antagonists. What happens at the end of the episode? He dies. It may have capped off the episode, but it was the first of 6 episodes. One of the lead characters is gone. The complaints were non-existent.
Aren't you the brave lord?
What have you done?
But I don't want the brave lord. Far too much trouble.
Ethan!
My lord!
Oh, no!
I knew you'd bend the knee eventually.
The last example comes from a game called The Godfather from 2006. You start off your adventure as Johnny Trapani, a member of the Corleone family. You manage to learn about his character and their relationship with his wife, Serafina. Then, their bakery explodes, and he is killed by members of the Barzini family.
Sorry, Johnny. It's just business. Give it to him.
Do you see my point? Yes, these examples are from initial entries in their respective franchises, and Joel's death happens after we spend time with him in Last of Us Part 1, but it still does not change his early murder. The examples that we discussed came from successful products, so I am baffled that an entire narrative is dismissed in The Last of Us Part 2 because an admired or beloved main character is killed. Number 3. Joel was mistreated. The Gamer2323, a YouTuber and a Twitch streamer, summed up his complaint accurately by stating the following: Joel was treated like a monster. He was a monster to Ellie, and he was a monster that had to be put down by Abby. The idea of Joel being disrespected has been a point of contention to many players and a reason as to why Ellie's antagonist was hated without any chance of redemption. My opinion on the matter is partially summed up by Neil Druckmann's comment on Troy Baker's Let's Get Into It video. You can also say that we disrespected Sarah, and we disrespected Tess, and we disrespected Henry and Sam. But that's just what happens in this world. You don't go out with respect. What the story needed was for Ellie to see Joel in such a brutal way. So that's what she could draw on when she then has to torture a person to find out where Abby is. Because without that, we cannot motivate the rest of the journey. Ultimately, Joel's mistreatment as a monster and a bad guy solely falls on the shoulders of one individual, Joel. He was assigned the role of Part 1's protagonist, but does not mean that he's a good person. His death and his disrespect by Ellie are his fault. If Joel was honest with Ellie, she could have been angry at him, but not to the extent that she will sever her relationship with him like in Part 2. If Joel did not kill the surgeon in Part 1, Abby most likely would have never interacted with Joel in the first place. I adore him and consider him as one of the best characters in video games, but I can also admit that some of his actions are questionable at best. If you do not believe Joel's characterization as a bad guy, what would you say if Joel admitted to it himself? In Part 1, he and Ellie are driving across the country and come across a group that ambushes them. After the confrontation, the pair ends up in a staircase where the following conversation takes place. If Joel was truly a good person, he would have had an explanation as to why he kills people. He could have claimed that he does it for the protection of his loved ones. He could have said that he does it for self-defense. However, he does not have an excuse because he knows the truth. In many people's eyes, including Abby in Part 2, he is the antagonist. Joel does everything in his power to protect Ellie, but his mistreatment in Part 2 is a consequence of his actions in Part 1.
How did you know
Know what?
about the ambush?
I've been on both sides.
Kill a lot of innocent people? I'll take that as a yes.
Take it however you want.
Number 4. Lack of closure for Ellie. I already touched on this complaint earlier in the video, so I will not spend too much time with it. However, I would like to reference a statement that was made in a YouTube video by Ace1918, who says, Ellie's forgiveness towards Abby in the end makes no sense and is treated as propaganda. Aside from the lack of clarity about the supposed propaganda, Ellie's decision to spare Abby at the end led to closure when it comes to her guilt for not being able to save Joel. When Ellie chokes Abby, she remembers the flashback where she started the process of forgiveness towards Joel. She understood that killing Abby will not lead to anything substantial. She would still have the nightmares, and she would do the exact opposite of what that flashback symbolizes: forgiveness. Ellie has not completely forgiven Abby, but she did enough to regain a part of herself that she lost after Joel's death. Number 5. Abby spares Ellie and Dina. Since we are talking about the concept of forgiveness, let us tackle this complaint as well. After Abby defeats Ellie in the theater, she's on the verge of killing Dina, who is pregnant. Lev calls out Abby's name, and both leave with a stern warning.
Don't ever let me see you again. Come on.
The reason why Abby spared Ellie points us to one of the title's themes, the cycle of vengeance. Ellie is the person who killed Abby's friends, not Dina. If Abby proceeded with the kill, she would remain in this endless cycle of vengeance against anyone who harms her. By sparing Dina and most importantly Ellie, she breaks the chain of violence and transforms into a protector as opposed to a hunter. It serves as a great character development when we compare her at the theater to her state of mind in the basement where she killed Joel. Her friends could have begged Abby to stop, but she was consumed with grief and anger. She would have killed Joel, regardless of what anyone would have told her at the time. Abby's character change in the theater is noteworthy, and I'm interested to see if we will continue our journey with her and Lev in Part 3. Number 6. Joel and Tommy let their guard down with Abby's group. Allow me to read you a note that Ellie finds during the early portion of the game. It is from Tara, a woman who currently resides in Jackson. My boys are different people here. Before Jackson, we were focused on just staying alive. I did not like who they were becoming. They started acting like the people we were running from. These days, they are on roofs fixing holes and digging trenches. Hard work, but they come home every night excited about building up this place. They have got a community, a reason to be accountable. You used to be a teacher. You could have a class from kids hungry for knowledge. This is not a fantasy. Please consider just stopping by. Let me show you around. Tara. 5 years separate The Last of Us Part 1 and The Last of Us Part 2. Being a part of Jackson for 5 years without a prominent danger from rogue groups made Joel, Ellie, Tommy, and Maria feel at home, mentally and physically. Based on the earliest moment in the game through the flashback at the museum, Joel's behavior resembles a hypothetical scenario where he took Sarah camping and into a dinosaur astronomy museum. The level of comfort and security, in addition to Abby's willingness to fight off the infected zombies together with Joel and Tommy, led to an initial trust between the three musketeers and an agreement to follow Abby back to her group. Furthermore, Joel and Tommy recognized the location of the group by referencing Baldwin's Place after they defeat the inhuman opponents.
Hey, I'm Tommy. That's Joel. What's your name?
Abby.
Abby, are you okay? That ain't gonna hold. We gotta go back. We can outrun them all the way to Jackson. We need to barricade that door. Tommy, we cannot stay here. The horses ain't making it all that way.
My friends are at a mansion just north of here. It's fenced in. We have the whole perimeter secure.
It's a Baldwin place. I can work.
All right. I'll get the door.
All right. You ride with me. Come on.
Come on!
They did not have a reason to distrust Abby or her group. If you believe that Joel would never trust someone who he randomly meets, think about The Last of Us Part 1. After maneuvering through some militia, Joel climbs through a window only to be attacked by Henry. There is some bantering back and forth, but Joel, Ellie, Henry, and Sam get on the same page. When Joel is asked to follow Henry and Sam to their group, he agrees to it. Why? Is he not concerned that it may be a rogue group? I know that Sam is a kid, but it doesn't eliminate the scenario that rogue groups can be groups with kids. If he was content with trusting Henry, then it is acceptable that he trusted Abby. Number 7. Characters from Part 1 are different from their counterparts in Part 2. The main argument focuses on 3 characters. Number 1. Joel. With this one, you can really refer to my response to the previous complaint. Number 2. Ellie. As a young woman around 18 years old, Ellie still maintains the level of curiosity and naivety from Part 1 that a teenager would experience. Although her seriousness after Joel's fatal injury is understood, the confusion arrives during the scene at the pot farm where Ellie and Dina smoke and engage in sexual intercourse. The irresponsible behavior does not come out of nowhere, because she experiences a similar interest in adult-oriented products at a younger age. During The Last of Us Left Behind downloadable content for the original game, Riley, her best friend, offers her a drink. You can decline it, but you can also accept the offer, which is a decision that a teenager should not make. The activities in the pot farm are not only normal because of Ellie's peculiarity, but also highlights the seriousness of the relationship between Ellie and Dina. Number 3. Tommy. As a protector, his brother's death initiated a character change from the original game. At first, however, it was not a complete transformation. His decision to go after Abby is a result of 2 key factors. On one hand, Tommy could never let something important linger in his mind, which is why he decided to help Joel in Part 1 with Ellie. On the other hand, Tommy knew that Ellie would go after Abby, and out of respect for Joel, he tried to stall her by getting a head start on the chase and informing Maria, his wife, about Ellie's plan. Tommy was always a guardian, and he maintained this persona until the fight in the theater. When Abby shot him, his body was damaged to the point that he could not normally walk. Furthermore, he and his wife decided to take a break from each other upon his return to Jackson. Joel's death, the injury, and his deteriorating relationship with Maria left him with nothing but one desire: avenge Joel through Ellie by helping her pinpoint Abby's location after the segment in the theater. The thirst for vengeance was everything to him at that moment. When Ellie declined, he lost it, which left him with nothing. The harsh reaction to Ellie's response comes from the loss of everything that he once held dear, and it is why I completely understand this train of thought. These characters go through some changes, but it all comes down to a single point. 5 years in a welcoming community that is relatively safe facilitates an allowable switch to their mental state and behavior. Number 8. General hate for Abby. The bulk of the criticism for The Last of Us Part 2 highlights a disdain for Ellie's antagonist and Joel's killer, Abby. Quoting Soda Poppin' from YouTube, this muscle fridge is played by Laura Bailey, and a lot of people do not like her, nor do they enjoy her as a playable character. Let us cover a few of the online comments to prove my point. The first of which, I will just show you the clip.
As a character, I didn't want to play her. I still don't want to play her. I want to play as Joel and Ellie! How difficult is that to understand?
Oh shit! Behind you!
I know I don't have to.
The second comment is by Fextra Life, who says, "Never have I ever had 20,000 people cheering every time I died because they hated the character I was playing, Abby, so much that they'd rather see her jump off a ledge over and over than carry on with the game." The last comment that we will cover for this point is by Upper Echelon Gaming, who says, "But when you lead with a comically muscular girl beating your favorite character to death while Ellie screams and begs her to stop, it kind of wrecks the idea of the player ever actually caring about what happens to her after that point." One of the reviewed complaints focused on Joel's mistreatment. In my opinion, it should be directed towards Abby. She's a wonderfully written and performed character who has more similarities with Joel and Ellie than you may think. Abby has nightmares of running down a corridor to find her dead father, just like Ellie with her PTSD moment. Abby's a parent figure to Lev, just like Joel is to Ellie. Abby and Joel kill innocent people for the protection of their loved ones. Although there are similarities between Abby and Ellie, they undergo opposite transformations. Ellie starts off as a typical teenager who experiences a romance with Dina and a slow construction of her relationship with Joel. Once he dies, she loses herself throughout the entire game, as well as her connections with loved ones like Jesse, Dina, and Tommy. By the end, she's by herself with nothing but closure for Joel's death. Abby begins her portrayal as an extremely hated individual because of her actions towards Joel. After you realize that Joel murdered her father, the character development for Abby begins, as she showcases deep care for her friends, Manny, Nora, Mel, and Owen. She ultimately befriends Yara and Lev, who teach her about the importance of protecting innocent people. By the end, she travels away with Lev and becomes his mother figure for their next chapter. I said it before and I will say it again. Joel's death is on him. If he had not killed Jerry, Abby's father, Abby would never make her way to Jackson. Her actions, while brutal, are understandable. Anyone would have done the same thing if someone killed their father or mother. If you're still upset by Joel's death, listen to the following alternate scenario for the premise of The Last of Us. The Cosmonaut Variety Hour, a YouTube persona, sums it up perfectly.
Let's go to an alternate universe. The year is 2013, and The Last of Us 1 has just come out. It features a doctor and his daughter in a post-apocalyptic world. The doctor's constantly trying to do the right thing, but the world is decaying so fast, and it's hard for him to recognize right from wrong. Then at the end of the story, he finds a girl who's immune to the virus, but he realizes that he has to kill her to make a cure. And since the world is already looking really bleak, he decides that he has to make the hard choice to sacrifice this girl in order to try to save humanity. It's a tough choice, but he knows that he has to do it because he is one of the last people alive who cares about mankind. But then, that little girl's dad kills him because humanity truly is selfish, and at the end of the day, people don't really want to be saved. Seems like a decent story to me. I could see that being in a video game. But then, a few years pass, and in this alternate universe, The Last of Us Part 2 comes out. And then we have to play as those other people. How dare Naughty Dog make me play as these lunatics? They were clearly the villains of the last game. Dr. Abby's dad was the true hero. He wanted to save the world. They killed my dad, and now they live in this peaceful country town? Are you fucking kidding me? That's not fucking fair. Joel is evil. Why would Naughty Dog try to make me feel bad for killing him? Wait, now I have to play as his daughter? Are you kidding me? She's a psychopath. Do you see how silly that sounds? I didn't even change the story, I just put it in a different order.
Remember, a character is not horribly written or performed because they kill a character that you love. Number 9. Abby's ending does not have any emotional ramifications. This complaint is mind-boggling to me. I could discuss how she felt betrayed when Isaac, her group's leader, did not allow her to protect Yara and Lev, who only attack others for self-defense. I could talk about Abby's reaction when she comes across Mel's and Owen's bodies in the aquarium. Nevertheless, I will surmise my thoughts on this quibble with 2 pictures. The first image is Abby prior to meeting the slavers in California, and the second image is Abby as Ellie found her on the beach towards the end of the game. If you're still under the impression that Abby's ending did not have any emotional ramifications for Abby, I'm not exactly sure what to tell you. Number 10. The Last of Us Part 2's narrative is a generic revenge plot. One of the reasons why I like The Last of Us Part 2 is due to its lack of a generic revenge plot. Neil Druckmann and Haley Gross created a story that takes risks, and in my opinion, pays off. Ellie's decision at the end to spare Abby showed a return to form for Ellie's character and the continued redemption arc for Abby. If Ellie killed Abby at the end, the plot would certainly be generic. John Wick is an example of it. Do not get me wrong, I love the franchise and place it on the pedestal when it comes to action films. However, what is the movie's plot? The Russian mob kills John's dog, and he proceeds to kill everyone. The end. I was amused from start to finish, but there is no denial that the movie has a generic revenge plot. The Last of Us Part 2's risks with Ellie and Abby set it far apart from anything remotely generic. Number 11 and the last complaint, reviews did not cover the second half of the game. I only have one question in response to this complaint. Why would you want mainstream reviewers to spoil the plot in their critiques? I never understood this complaint. When the scores for Marvel's Avengers Endgame, which is a movie that was released in 2019, came out, they did not cover the second half of the film, which included the mind-blowing battle and the return of some beloved characters. Why was there no uproar? Exploring narrative plot points for yourself is essential. I have spent a good portion of this video with a defense of The Last of Us Part 2. However, I also mentioned that nothing is perfect and Part 2 is no exception. There are certain aspects of the game that either could have used some more polished or needed a complete makeover. I have 3 suggestions when it comes to gameplay. First, the addition of new types of infected zombies was not sufficient. I appreciate the shamblers and stalkers in the game, as well as the modification of the bloaters. However, I wish there would have been more than just 2 types of zombies, excluding the boss in the hospital with Abby. Secondly, the group of slavers in California needed more context. It depends on a question that we will be discussing soon, but the treatment of this group as a random slave trade company felt out of place and extended the game beyond the point where it maybe should have ended. The last point is nitpicking but noticeable. During the vehicle escape with Jesse and Ellie, you have infinite ammo. I understand the point behind it, but it is a minor annoyance that caught my attention. What if you had to choose your shots during the segment? It would have added more tension, especially when the clicker threatened to enter your space from the front of the car. As far as improvements for the narrative are concerned, I decided to provide 2 methods of enhancements. The first one will be to take the current story and reshuffle the scenes to upgrade the game's pacing. And the second type of improvement will be to write an original narrative in place of the current story for Part 2. We will explore these options, but I would like to address 4 important questions before we proceed. Number 1. Is the story justified for existing? In my opinion, yes, as its events wonderfully connect the sequel to the original Last of Us and provides further character development for Joel, Ellie, and Tommy. Number 2. Did the story need to continue? Honestly, no. I was perfectly content with the ending of the original Last of Us, but I am glad that we received a noteworthy sequel. Number 3. Are there any remaining Fireflies, or were the people on the radio slavers the entire time? If there are Fireflies, then introducing the slave trade company during the segment of California is unnecessary and tacked in. Number 4. Is there a hidden point to the timing of the flashbacks? The only main complaint that I did not address is the abundance of flashbacks. I did not personally mind them, but it is vital to observe every flashback, analyze what happens prior to them, and decide if their placement in the narrative makes sense. Otherwise, their position in the plotline is questionable and worthy of criticism. The first flashback is with Joel and Ellie in the museum. It happens right after Ellie and Dina reach the theater, and it makes sense to put it here because Ellie's short guitar session reminded her of the beginning of the flashback, as it opens by Ellie trying to play guitar on her own. The second flashback is when Ellie calls out Joel for not encountering another immune person. It happens right after Ellie returns with Jesse in the theater. This, unfortunately, is a flashback that its placement does not make sense because there's no connection between what happens prior to the flashback and the memory itself. The third flashback is when Ellie demands the truth from Joel about the events in the hospital in part 1. It happens right after Ellie kills Nora. And to me, it makes sense because right before the flashback happens, Ellie tells Dina that she does not want to lose her. Joel has a similar feeling during the flashback when he thought that he lost Ellie at the end of the flashback. The fourth flashback is the transition to Abby's story. It happens after Abby ambushes Ellie, Jesse, and Tommy, and to me it makes sense because it establishes the reason why Abby had an issue with Joel prior to Joel's death, and why Abby acted so strongly to Ellie killing her friends. The fifth flashback is when Abby and Owen are at the Ferris wheel. It happens right before Abby's departure to find Owen, who is missing in action, and personally it makes sense because it develops chemistry and relationship between Abby and said missing person, who is Owen. The sixth flashback is Christmas with Owen. It happens right after Abby gets captured by the Scars, and to me it does not make a whole lot of sense because there's a massive disconnect between the memory and Abby's predicament at the time. There is no connection between Abby being captured by the Scars and Abby spending Christmas with Owen. The seventh flashback is the party in Jackson. It happens after Ellie closes all the windows back in the farm and plays the guitar. It makes sense to me here because while Ellie plays the guitar, she not only remembers Joel, but she also realizes that she cannot return to a happy life that she experienced in the community without receiving closure for her guilt, which in her opinion at the time stems from the inability to save Joel. The final flashback happens on Joel's porch after Ellie fails to play the guitar at the end of the game. It makes sense here because the event leading up to the flashback is when Ellie tries to forgive Abby, which is a direct correlation to the scenario where Ellie tries to forgive Joel. Now that we have responded to a few necessary questions, we can dive into specific changes to the narrative. We will start with the reconstruction of the current plot with the same characters, levels, and scenes. There will be a few additions, but they will not alter the core story points. Here's how I would reshuffle The Last of Us Part 2. You start off with Abby's flashback at the zoo. Afterwards, you include a 4-hour gameplay session where Abby develops her relationships with Owen, Nora, Manny, and Mel. Then you transition to Ellie, where you experience the first 3 flashbacks from her side of the story. Continue by playing the current introduction of the game until Joel's guitar session at Ellie's cabin. Showcase the last 2 flashbacks, which are Jackson's party and Ellie's discussion with Joel on the porch, and then continue with Joel's guitar session. You can include a scene where Joel is trying to make up for his dishonesty between the flashbacks and his rendition of Pearl Jam song. At that point, switch to Abby and escort her to the cabin near Jackson. Switch back to Ellie and continue the story as normal, stopping after Abby kills Joel. Now, start Ellie's first day in Seattle and switch with Abby at the end of each day. Once you reach Ellie's third day, play it, but end it right after Tommy tells Jesse and Ellie about the gold jewelry he found from Maria. Play through Abby's third day and continue till the end of the fight between her and Ellie in the theater. Proceed with Abby to California. She will attempt to contact the Fireflies but be captured by a group of slavers who pretended to be Fireflies on the radio to get more merchandise, quote unquote, for their business. You switch back to Ellie and continue through the story. Right before the moment where she leaves the guitar near the window and heads off, have a mental depiction where Ellie and Joel talk to each other, similar to the discussion between Lee and Clementine during the third episode of Skybound's The Walking Dead final season. Joel should encourage her, saying that she may have lost a lot, but she regained her humanity in the process. Play out the last scene and end the game. It is time for the most challenging aspect of my Last of Us 2's critique: writing an original narrative that continues Ellie's and Joel's adventure from part 1. I respect Neil's and Haley's vision in the current product, but the upcoming narrative would have been an interesting take in the duo's next chapter throughout the post-apocalyptic world. The narrative takes two assumptions into consideration. First, Naughty Dog can include the referenced songs in the game, and two, that Ellie's mother, Anna, did not die during pregnancy. It is implied in her letter to Ellie, but remember my rule with regards to a character's death. If I do not see it, there is a possibility that it did not happen. With that being said, let's get started. The game begins with a birthday surprise to Ellie by Joel. Joel takes Ellie to an old arcade where they play the video game with angel knives. Ellie beats Joel and tells him about Riley. When it becomes dark outside, Joel brings a telescope and takes Ellie to a remote area away from the community's lights. They look at the stars and Joel wishes Ellie a happy birthday. They hug, and an acoustic version of Letters from the Sky by Civil Twilight plays in the background. On the way back to camp, they are attacked by zombies and the players are introduced to the new dodge mechanic. They both make it to camp and say goodnight to each other to end the scene. The next day, Dina and Ellie go on patrol, where they develop their chemistry and start to showcase their affection to each other. They talk about the idea of friendship, and as time passes, they realize that their friendship is becoming love. On the way back to camp, they run into Joel, who is going out on patrol with Tommy. Later that night, there is a party in the community where Ellie and Dina dance and kiss for the first time. Ellie takes Dina to her cabin where she sings the song This Is Why I Need You by Jesse Rubens on the guitar. As they proceed to make out, Jesse, the camp's leader, approaches them and asks if they have seen Joel and Tommy, signaling that they have not returned from their patrol. Switching to Joel, you and Tommy are camped in the woods and you tell Tommy about Ellie's rescue from the hospital. Joel is showing regret and asks for advice when it comes to telling Ellie the truth. The less likely it will be for Ellie to forgive him. They pack their things to head back to camp, but they are ambushed by a group called WLF, Wolf League Federation. Led by a woman named Abby, the group shoots Tommy, killing him on the spot. Meanwhile, they take Joel into the darkness of the woods. You cut to a flashback that details the first meeting between Tess and Joel. Tess was the leader of a smuggling ring and saved Joel from being killed by infected zombies or human police. He thanks her and says that he will do whatever it takes, just like he did with Ellie in the hospital, to help the ones he trusts. Now, Joel wakes up in a basement, tied up to a railing. Abby comes down and asks Joel if he knows her. Understandably, he does not recognize her. Abby shows him a picture of Marlene, indicating that the WLF are surviving members of the Fireflies. Joel asks Abby about her intentions, but she simply replies, "I will let her decide what to do with you." Another flashback showcases the first encounter between Ellie, Riley, and Marlene, based on the American Dream comic book. During that scene, the origin of Ellie's shiv is revealed, as well as the name of Ellie's mother, Anna. Returning to present day, Ellie, Jesse, and Dina set out to find Tommy and Joel. On their way, they meet two former Fireflies who were kicked out of the group for endangering the community, Lev and Yara. Throughout their journey, you learn the following information. Number 1, Dina and Jesse used to be lovers for a few weeks earlier and have a child back in the community. Number 2, Yara left the Fireflies because she killed a Firefly to protect Lev. And number 3, Lev left the Fireflies because the group disagreed with his sexual orientation, aka being a transgender. At that moment, you realize that the WLF is a rogue Firefly group consisting of former Fireflies, but they are more worried about protecting themselves than humanity. Lev and Yara take the gang to the last known spot of the WLF, and they enter a graveyard. As they walk by the graves, they notice that Lev breaks down in front of a certain tombstone. It is his mother's resting place, and on the tombstone, there is an engraving explaining that she was executed for nurturing a child who would go against the traditions of the WLF. The group gives their final thoughts and continues the search for the WLF. The group sits around a fire and talks about their motivation for fighting. Ellie talks about Joel and Dina, Yara and Lev talk about each other, Dina talks about Ellie and her baby, and Jesse talks about his baby and the people of Jackson. They realize that they are all fighting for the same idea, family. In the end, Ellie starts to sing Watch Over You by Alter Bridge, and everyone sings along to close the scene. A flashback follows an event where Abby is teaching a group of kids how to play hide and seek in the woods. A few officers rush into the scene and tell Abby that they are ordered to protect her and the children after the news of a madman attacking the nearest hospital and the Firefly base. Abby ignores the order, asks the officers to protect the younglings, and goes to the hospital, only to find the leader of the Fireflies, Marlene, dead in the parking lot. As Abby mourns, she hears Marlene's voice in her head, saying that she failed Abby. When Abby comes to her senses, she is told by the survivors that the madman's name is Joel, and he destroyed the last hope for a cure. Abby, now consumed with grief, is dedicated to the survival of her own group and revenge against Joel. Abby goes down to the basement and asks Joel about his failures to see if there is any hope for him as a decent and good person. Joel, being cautious at first, shares his failures, explaining that he failed to protect Sarah from dying. He also failed Ellie by lying to her about what happened at the hospital. Abby gets visibly upset and starts to beat up Joel. A Firefly member, Owen, stops Abby, informing her about a group of 5 strangers who is approaching the camp. Ellie's group approaches the camp, as Yara informs Ellie that Joel is possibly in the basement of the main building. Taking out guards one by one, they approach the main building and open the door to the basement. Upon opening the door, Jesse receives an arrow to the head. Yara and Lev manage to wiggle by the guards to run away, but Ellie and Dina are brutalized, captured, and tied next to Joel. A flashback takes place in the time when Abby is visibly younger, mid-20s. She's pregnant but continues to go on missions with Marlene as part of the Fireflies. While on a mission against infected zombies, Abby gets seriously injured. In a state of shock, they retreat to the hospital, only to have her water break and be ready to deliver her child. The doctors are predicting that she will not survive. Per her dying wish, she asks Marlene to take care of her kid. While this is happening, the police are forcing themselves into the building and proceed to arrest everyone. Abby delivers the baby and Marlene takes the baby away. Before she leaves, however, she turns to Abby and asks what the baby should be called. Abby smiles and says, Ellie. Abby talks to Joel and Ellie in the basement. She asks Ellie what she is willing to do for the people she trusts, and she responds by saying everything. She then asks if Ellie trusts Joel, and she nods in agreement. Abby asks Joel if there is something he would like to say. He remains silent. Abby, left without a choice, reveals the truth. She is Ellie's mother. In the beginning, Ellie is taken aback by it and questions Abby because, according to the letter from her mother, her real name is Anna and she was supposed to die while giving birth to Ellie. Abby responds that she survived after all, and the Firefly suggests that she runs away, change her name to avoid the police, and protect her family. Abby responds by saying that she survived after all, and the Firefly suggests that she changes her name and runs away to avoid the police and protect her family, especially because she was also immune to the infection. Ellie asks why she left her with Marlene, and Abby says that Marlene was a better fit to her as a mother, since Abby was an emotional and physical wreck. They come close to embracing and hugging, But then Ellie takes a step back and looks at Joel, who is miserable, physically beaten, and crying. Ellie demands his release, and Abby agrees under two conditions. First, Joel tells her exactly what happened during Ellie's rescue from the hospital. And two, Ellie listens to an audio cassette by Marlene on the day she died. Joel, committed to the end, looks at Ellie and says, "If I had a chance to go back to that moment at the hospital, I would do the same thing all over again." Ellie listens to the tape with a surprising expression as she finds out that Joel was responsible for taking Ellie away from the hospital and stopping the creation of the virus's cure. She breaks down and Abby attempts to comfort her, only to be pushed back by Ellie. As Abby continues to blame Joel and Joel gradually tears up from his regrets, the scene ends with a close-up to Ellie's face, whose emotions change from sadness to anger. This is the point of the game where you have to make a critical decision that will give you one or two endings. We will go through the first ending, and then we'll go to the second ending. This choice is whether or not you have to save Joel or Abby. We will start by saving Joel. Ellie attacks Abby, which leads both characters upstairs to the main lobby of the house to a cat and mouse sequence, like the one between David and Ellie in The Last of Us Part 1. Abby, now fighting to remain the protector of her community, breaks Ellie's leg. However, it is followed by Ellie's attack, which leaves Abby on the floor, bleeding to her death. Abby lays down, apologizing for failing Ellie as a mother. Her daughter cries, holds Abby's hand, and watches her slowly gasp her last breath. Ellie goes back to Joel and Dina, cuts them loose, and escapes with them through the forest. When they reach a hilltop, they stop as Ellie and Joel have a heart-to-heart conversation about the revelation in the WLF's basement. She asks Joel, "Why did you lie to me?" He said that he considered Ellie as his daughter, and he was not going to sacrifice his daughter for a vaccine. Ellie, rightfully so, says that it is not his choice to make, as it would have made her life meaningful. She understands Joel's decision, but she thinks it would be best to take a break from each other once they return to Jackson. Joel is reluctant, but ultimately concedes, as he does not have a choice if he wants to fix their relationship in the future. From that point, they go back to Jackson. A few months later, it is Joel's birthday. While he is working in the ranch, Maria tells Joel that Ellie needs him in her cabin. As Joel walks towards the cabin, he runs into Lev and Yara, who made their way to the camp together with Joel and Ellie. They seem to have settled well in the community. When Joel opens the cabin's door, Ellie is sitting near her desk, facing away from the front door. Joel asks about her well-being when Ellie turns around with a wrapped gift. Joel asks about her well-being when Ellie turns around with a wrapped box. She wishes Joel a happy birthday and makes a joke about his age. Joel opens the box and it is a new watch, with a picture of Ellie and Joel on its face. Joel goes ahead and tells Ellie a dad joke about time.
What is the downside to eating a clock? It's time consuming.
That's so dumb.
Yeah.
Then they hug each other. During the last scene, Ellie tells Joel that she has another surprise for him. Ellie takes out the guitar and starts to sing an acoustic version of "You Are My Sunshine" by Johnny Cash. Ellie sings the first 4 verses and Joel sings the next 2 verses. On the penultimate verse, Ellie sings the first 2 lines and Joel sings the rest of the verse. Lastly, Joel and Ellie sing the last verse together. They smile at each other, the scene cuts to black, and the credits roll. Now we go back to check out the second ending, where you choose to save Abby. Ellie leaves the basement, allowing Abby to do whatever she wants with Joel. She sits on the couch and attempts to close her eyes and relax to lower her anxiety from the decision that she just made. Then a flashback brings her back to a moment near a waterfall where Joel teaches her how to swim. They swim to an island where they explore a museum. As they enter the facility, they realize that it is a history museum. At first, they experience a few happy moments when they interact with the first light bulb, the first telephone, and the first airplane. However, they proceed to the World War II section, where the horrific impact of wars is brought to light from Ellie's perspective. A moment of horror arrives when Ellie and Joel reach a memorial for the lost souls of the Holocaust. Ellie asks about the victims' identities, and she finds out that they include men, women, and children. She tears up and she feels defeated by the notion that nobody, whether they are good or bad, can escape death. Joel comforts her and says, "I will do everything in my power to make sure that you are safe and live a life that is better than anything I could ever experience." Fueled by regret, Ellie gets up from the couch and runs back to the basement where she left Abby and Joel. When she reaches the bottom of the stairs, Abby is gone. It did not prevent Ellie from falling on her knees and scream from the top of her lungs, as Joel's head is impaled with a spear. She crawls towards his dead carcass and yells out his name. The screaming becomes a set of whispers as she apologizes to Joel for not being able to save him. After a few moments of silence, Ellie turns around and runs outside, hoping to confront her mother for what she did to Joel. Ellie finds Abby in the middle of the camp. When Ellie blames Abby for killing Joel, her mother explains that the longer Joel was kept alive and in contact with Ellie, the more likely it would have been for her daughter to go down the path of a killer. Ellie, who will not stop her premature quest for revenge, suggests that they fight, as she will not give up and Abby will not allow her kid to sacrifice the well-being of the new community. They fight in hand-fist battle, and Ellie is the last woman standing. As Ellie turns her back on Abby, her mother quickly stands up and, thinking that she threatens Ellie, Lev and Yara shoot her with arrows, killing Ellie's mother. Lev and Yara run to Ellie and check on her well-being. However, all Ellie can do is stare ahead, as she attempts to face the fact that her maternal mother and father figure are dead. Yara slaps Ellie to shake her off from her trance, and as soon as she recognizes Yara's face, Ellie runs towards the woods. While Ellie traverses further and further into the forest, she recalls her night with Joel outdoors where they looked at the stars and embraced each other. The same song from the beginning plays in the background until Ellie reaches a cliff. In Ellie's mind, she lost her family. She mainly focused on Tommy, Abby, and Joel, all of whom are dead. Ellie stares over the cliff and contemplates a jump to her death. Thankfully, Yara and Lev manage to catch up with Ellie and try to talk to her of committing suicide by reminding her that they consider her a part of the family. Ellie begins to cry and says, "I lost people who meant everything to me. I will not let the rest of my loved ones die because of me." She starts to walk back to the edge, and with a final tear dropping to the floor, she leans back and falls to her demise. Yara and Lev look at Ellie's body beneath them, and Yara, the more mature individual out of the pair, puts her arms around Lev and tries to maintain his composure. She tells Lev that they need to hurry and get out of the area before Abby's people find them. However, Lev reminds Yara that Dina is still in captivity. Playing as Lev, both go back to the camp and manage to escape the area with Dina, who only suffered a few bruises. 6 months pass and the game cuts to a scene in California. Yara and Lev and Dina are walking and scavenging supplies from the abandoned houses. While fighting the infected, they see the bodies of dead families and remember Ellie and Jesse. Suddenly, one of them finds a journal and a recent entry about a group of people that are located along California's coast. They make their way to the designated place, and the last shot of the game pinpoints a spot on the main gate, which includes a symbol that, as Dina points out, resembles the one for the Fireflies. It is officially the end of my Last of Us Part 2 critique. We discussed what I liked about the game, what could have been improved, and what others have said about the product. Although the focus is on Part 2, let us investigate the future and speculate about the next chapter in The Last of Us's lore. Neil Druckmann already stated that there are no plans for story-based downloadable content. Nevertheless, I have some ideas if Neil happens to change his mind. There are 3 scenarios that can be explored. Scenario 1. At the end of the first flashback with Joel and Ellie, Joel asks Ellie to come with him to build a fire. It could be a reference to the same night at the bonfire that Dina mentioned after Ellie sang Take On Me. Play Joel's and Ellie's venture to the area of the bonfire, including fights with human enemies and zombies, and play out the scene where Ellie and Joel sing the song together. Scenario 2. The Last of Us Part 2 begins with the moment Joel talks to Tommy about what happened at the end of The Last of Us Part 1 in the hospital. Play as Joel and Tommy on a recon mission for Jackson, while Tommy notices that Joel progressively shows signs of concern for his relationship with Ellie. Scenario 3. Directly after the ending of Part 2, follow in Lev's and Abby's footsteps to see what is the next chapter of their journey. Their boat ends on an island. Passed out on the beach, Abby and Lev are taken into a community of huts, where it is revealed that the island is populated by the original members of Lev's and Yara's tribe, the Scars. You gain insight into the cultural norms of the tribe, as well as the opportunity to teach the members about the importance of selfless survival instead of selfish hierarchy that is based on prejudice. At the end of the downloadable content, Abby decides to depart and return to her group. She is ready to either maintain her status in the group or be punished for her actions against Isaac. Prior to her departure though, Lev decides to leave with her and stick by Abby till the end. Since we're discussing the future of the franchise, let us stand by Neil's decision to avoid additional downloadable content. In that case, there is one more option for the franchise's continuation, The Last of Us Part 3. Ultimately, it will be the writer's decision. However, I wrote a short story that could be used as the plot for the third and what should be, in my opinion, the final game in the trilogy. Let's see what's in store in my version of the trilogy's conclusion. The game begins with the first cutscene from the original Last of Us. Joel enters his house while talking to someone about the contractor. When the camera pans to the couch though, you don't see Sarah. You see Ellie, who reenacts the scene up until she's awakened by a phone call. When she answers the phone, nobody's talking. She hears a static sound and hangs up. You take control of Ellie at this point, walking around Joel's original house, which has undergone major changes since you took the detour in The Last of Us Part 1. There are pictures on the wall showing Ellie and Joel together. As you walk through the house, you hear Joel in your head, screaming at Ellie to save him. When Ellie opens the door to the room where the newscaster talks about the pandemic, she sees Dina packing her bags and leaving the farm with JJ. Ellie proceeds to go down and check the first floor of the house. She sees Tommy sitting in the kitchen area, sharpening his knife and looking at her with disgust because she could not get the job done at the end of The Last of Us Part 2. She looks outside of the screen door and sees David chopping up a body that looks like Ellie. She is immediately freaked out because she does not know what is going on. The sequence ends when Ellie runs to the front door, opens it up, and sees Abby, who stands there looking at her with piercing eyes and says, "It won't end like last time." The screen cuts to black and the logo for The Last of Us Part 3 is displayed. There is one thing I should mention about this sequence. The design of the house will have to be somewhat different from the original design of The Last of Us Part 1 for the obvious reason that Ellie was never in Joel's house in the first place. Now let's continue. The story begins with Abby and Lev as their boat approaches the port of Catalina Island. They are greeted by a group of soldiers who ask for identification, to which Abby responds by saying that she and Lev are looking to join the Firefly group that is stationed on the island. The soldiers call into base and ask for authorization to bring them to camp. You can hear a voice on the radio that is similar to the person with whom you spoke about the Fireflies back in Santa Barbara.
Hi, Abby. We got a clear signal on you. Where in Santa Barbara you calling from?
2425 Constance. We got a tip about a base, but there's no one here. We're looking for Fireflies. I'm a Firefly.
Where were you stationed?
I was part of the Salt Lake outpost.
Who ran that facility?
Dr. Jerry Anderson. He was my dad.
Well, how about that? We pulled everyone back from the satellite stations and brought them back here to home base.
How many of you are there?
We're about 200 strong now, with a few more every month.
Owen was right. You're about to get 2 more. How do we find you?
Get to Catalina Island. Approach the large domed building in Avalon. We'll find you.
Okay. Okay, we'll see you soon. Over and out.
Looking forward to it. Good luck, Abby from Santa Barbara. Over and out.
The man on the radio agrees to Abby's request, and the soldiers proceed to escort Abby and Lev to the Fireflies. Along the way, you are reintroduced to the combat mechanics while fighting the infected. With that being said, a couple of new additions will be acknowledged and demonstrated in this section. The first one is the ability to mark enemies. This command will allow you to highlight enemies who should be the targets of your AI companions. Holding this command will allow for a stealth approach if possible, while simply clicking the command will give your teammates the authority to kill the enemy by any means necessary. The second new feature is a new enemy type called lungers. The name could be debated. These new infected zombies are able to leap forward towards you instead of charging at you. You can dodge them with the perfect timing while using the dodge command. If they grab you though, they will knock you down and take a chunk out of your health. When they reach the Firefly camp, Lev cannot believe what he sees. Houses that are all powered with electricity and smoke that is released from the chimneys and smells like cooked meat and vegetables. Kids who are chasing around each other playfully. A park where groups of kids are sitting in front of several adults who teach them math and science. While Lev is walking throughout the camp, Abby is brought to Maya, the leader of the Fireflies. They talk about how the camp manages to mimic and provide a normal life for the group, and their main objective is finding a cure for the pandemic. It is at this point when Maya brings up a conversation that she had in the past with Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies in Utah. At that moment, a flashing image of Marlene appears in Abby's mind, as she is reminded of the moment when Marlene asked Abby's dad if he would sacrifice his own daughter if she was immune from the virus. Up until here, Abby had no idea that Ellie was immune to the virus. Now, Maya tells Abby about Ellie's condition, to which Abby responds with shock and fear. It was shocking because it was the first time that she heard about someone being immune to the infection, and it was fear-inducing because she believed that humanity would have been doomed had she killed Ellie in Santa Barbara or in the theater. Maya's current predicament revolves around Ellie's whereabouts. Abby suggests that she and Lev are sent to Jackson to try and convince Ellie to come back to the Firefly camp and help generate a vaccine. Abby wants to do it because it will help humanity, but more importantly, it will allow her to finish what her father started in the first Last of Us. Maya concurs with Abby, and she gives her the green light to start the journey. However, she insists that 3 people from her camp accompany Abby and Lev to Jackson and back. The first person's name is Liam, one of the camp's lieutenants. He's 30 years of age. He is hyper-focused on accomplishing the group's tasks and protecting the inhabitants at all costs. His overly serious attitude is justified due to his young sister's death several years earlier because she saved him from harm. More information about that will be revealed. The second person's name is Isabella, a 19-year-old kid who is mute. It is explained to us that she is an orphan whose parents were killed by the infected zombies, and Liam has been assigned to protect her ever since the group scoured her abandoned village and found her as she was on the verge of death from starvation. Isabella is also assigned to Abby's group because Liam insisted on it. The third person's name is Anthony, a 43-year-old doctor who is included in the group in case the leaders of the Jackson camp need reassurance that extracting the needed materials from Ellie will work to create a vaccine. Maya debriefs the group about their task: go to the camp in Jackson County, Wyoming, gain Ellie's trust about the procedure, and return to the Firefly camp. Right before the team leaves, Lev approaches Isabella and tries to spark a friendly conversation with her. However, Liam pushes Lev to the ground and warns him to avoid talking to her. Abby pushes Liam to the ground in retaliation, and after Maya breaks up the argument and reminds the teammates about the importance of the mission, the group ventures off to Jackson. While the group takes the boat to the shore of Santa Barbara, they encounter a new type of infected: swimmers. They are mutated zombies that can swim very fast. As Abby, you must shoot the swimmers that are approaching your boat, leading to its eventual arrival to the beach. From this point until the group's arrival in Jackson, the group fights the infected and human rebels while making a few pit stops. The first pit stop happens at Death Valley National Park. The group rests near a lake. Before everyone goes to sleep, Abby, Lev, Anthony, Isabella, and Liam sit down next to a fire, and Abby briefly tells the group what happened between her and Ellie. This conversation leads to her retelling of losing Owen and Mel, which encourages everyone to talk about the people they have lost. Lev talks about Yara, Isabella draws a picture on the sand of her parents, and Anthony talks about his daughter, who he never had the chance to meet prior to the pandemic. When it was Liam's turn, Liam insisted on going to bed, which leads to everyone doing the same. However, as soon as the scene transitioned to what will be the continuation of their journey, you play as Liam and re-experience his loss. Liam and his sister Zoe lived in a community that emphasized the importance of work and strength. If you could not pull your weight around the place, you would be kicked out. If you were too old or too sick, you will be kicked out. As the game starts, you walk around with your sister to bring the animals that you hunted to the butcher. Suddenly, a number of soldiers approach Liam, beat him to the ground, and take him into custody. Zoe tries to stop them, demanding that they will tell her why is Liam being taken away. The soldiers explain that stolen medical supplies were found in Liam's and Zoe's room, and they believe that Liam took them. As Liam prepares to confess, Zoe charges in, saying that she's the culprit. The guards take her and Liam screams at them to bring her back. Liam closes his eyes for a few seconds and then he opens them again. And when he opens them again, he is in a sea of people, looking at a stage in front of them. Zoe was tied to a pole, facing a group of soldiers that was located to the right of the stage. A woman on the speakers treats what is about to happen as entertainment and punishment for breaking the law. But Liam is clearly not having any of it. As the woman speaks about dignity and respect, Liam pushes through the strangers to reach Zoe. Sadly, it is too late. After Zoe and Liam look at each other one last time, the soldiers fire their guns towards Zoe, killing her within seconds. Liam stares at Zoe's lifeless body, and as a single scream is heard around the camp, Isabella wakes him up. Liam denies what happened in the dream to the group. Everyone packs up and continues to the next location. The second pit stop happens at Salt Lake City. The group approaches an abandoned camp that is filled with landmines. Whoever lived there must have taken everything with them and booby-trapped the place for possible thieves or the infected themselves. As the group makes their way from one end of the encampment to the other, Liam sees a horrifying sight. In the middle of the camp there is a metal pole, and tied to it is a young girl. The girl seems to have been dead for quite a while, but it doesn't stop Liam from thinking about his sister Zoe. All of a sudden, Liam hears a click sound. He turns around and Isabella is frozen in place because she touched a landmine. Abby and Lev attempt to find a rope to quickly rescue her, but a landmine explodes somewhere else nearby and infected zombies are alerted to the group's location. Liam covers Abby, Lev, and Anthony while they tie the rope around Isabella, and they are prepared to pull her out. The infected increase in numbers, and a few lungers join the fray. Isabella is pulled away from the exploding landmine, and the group prepares for their escape, but Liam is caught and bitten by a lunger. He pleads everyone else to escape as Isabella starts to cry and motion him to come over. He smiles towards Isabella, and in his mind he says, "I will see you soon, Zoe. I won't let this girl suffer my own fate." One more lunger attacks Liam and he's tackled by the rest of the infected. Liam dies. Isabella tries to run towards Liam, but Lev grabs her and the rest of the group makes a break for it. As Abby, Lev, Isabella, and Anthony approach the gates of Jackson, a sniper scope is shown, aiming at Abby. After a couple of knocks on the gate, two guards open the gate and Anthony asks if Ellie is present. The guards ask the group to relinquish their weapons, which is accepted. Abby is asked to stay at the gates while Anthony, Lev, and Isabella are escorted to see Maria, Jackson's leader. While the group walks to Maria's whereabouts, you notice that the people who live in the camp are staring at the visitors fearfully. Their confidence and hope has gone down due to Joel's demise, Tommy's change in attitude, and a third factor that will be revealed shortly. Lev and Anthony understand the inhabitants' concerns, but Isabella is confused and rather scared herself that this request for Ellie will lead to more harm than good. The guards take Anthony, Lev, and Isabella into the house where Maria set up her headquarters. She recognizes Lev from Dina's recounting of the events in the theater during Last of Us Part 2 and asks, in an aggressive tone, why the group is here. Anthony, the medical professional and adult out of the three, introduces himself, and Isabella claims that they are from the Fireflies, and they seek Ellie to try and convince her to help them make a vaccine against the ongoing pandemic. Maria acknowledges the need for a vaccine as she remembers Joel's description of the quest during his visit in Last of Us Part 1. Unfortunately, she's pessimistic about the notion that Ellie will help them for a couple of reasons. On one hand, Ellie has stopped listening to Maria ever since Joel's death. On the other hand, Ellie left the community once she came back to Jackson and was rejected by Dina. Maria does not have a clue about Ellie's location, but she claims that Tommy may know because he was the last person with whom Ellie spoke prior to her departure. At that moment, Abby's bruised body is tossed on the ground, while Tommy is pointing a gun at her. Tommy demands an explanation as to why Abby was not immediately shot upon her arrival. He says that he deserved justice for what Abby did to him, as well as for her executed murderous intent against his brother Joel. Abby caves in, informing Tommy and Maria about something that they did not know. Her father was a surgeon who worked with Marlene, and Joel killed him while rescuing Ellie. Her father never wanted to cause harm, instead aiming for creating a product that will save humanity instead of allowing it to regress into a species of infected zombies. At first, Tommy rejects that notion because it would mean that Joel would be the bad guy in the story. He does not concur with it at all, but he reaches the conclusion that Abby's father was trying to protect her the same way that Joel tries to protect Ellie. He lets go of his desire to kill Abby, but he demands that the group leaves immediately. As the last attempt to get some answers, Anthony asks Tommy if he may know where Ellie might be. In fact, he does. Before Ellie left Jackson, she asks Tommy if she can go to Joel's old house to retrieve some items that may remind her of him. Tommy goes ahead and shows Anthony the location of Joel's house on the map, and the group heads out of Jackson. The group stands outside of Jackson's gates and talks about what's the best course of action. Meanwhile though, Isabella grabs Lev's arms and points him in the direction from where they originally came. She approached Lev because he's the only person in the group that makes her feel secure. Both Lev and Abby weren't sure about Isabella's intentions. Anthony gives her a piece of paper and a pencil to write down her request. Isabella, apparently, wants to go back to the Fireflies. She is scared for her life because of what happened to Liam. Lev signals Abby and Anthony to give them some space, and Lev talks to Isabella about how he's afraid as well. He's afraid because of his identity. He's afraid because Ellie was unstable the last time he saw her, and he does not know what will happen when they find Ellie. Lastly, he is afraid that he will die, just like Yara did. They both hug each other, and Isabella promises that she will not allow him to die, similarly to how Liam wouldn't allow Isabella to die. They both make a promise that neither of them will die, and after Lev suggests that they catch up to Abby and Anthony, Isabella grabs Lev's hand and leads him to the rest of the group. Abby, Lev, Anthony, and Isabella make their way to Austin, Texas. On their way, they fight the infected, including a mix of lungers and swimmers, a group of bandits that communicates via whistling akin to the Seraphites from Last of Us Part 2, and a trio of bloaters that attack the group at the same time. While these moments will spread out as they walk from point A to point B, a vital scenario will occur in Mineral County, Colorado. The four individuals spot smoke while climbing down a hilltop. They beeline towards it in the hopes that the people who created the fire would help them with food and shelter. When they arrive at the location, they attempt to find the people behind the camping site. While Abby looks in the bushes nearby, an arrow is shot at her, which she manages to dodge. At this point, Abby partakes in a boss fight where she must locate the person who is shooting the arrows. Listen mode is disabled during this section, and weapons are useless against the predator. When she finally locates the attacker, it turns out to be Dina, who was looking for the group to stop them from finding Ellie. Although she's still mad at Ellie, she does not want Ellie to sacrifice herself for humanity, especially thanks to Abby's quest and by the off chance that the medical operation will not be successful. As Abby pins Dina to the ground, the other members of the group try to explain the importance of quote-unquote thinking about the greater good as opposed to being selfish. With that being said, they all recognize and remind Dina that the decision to undergo the surgery will ultimately be Ellie's and no one else's. Dina decides to participate in the task of finding Ellie, at least until she's found and makes up her mind. The next cutscene features Maya back at the camp, who is debating whether or not the core group has been successful with locating Ellie. She decides to send a few fireflies to Jackson to talk to Tommy and see if she can speed up the process of finding the immune girl. She asks the chosen folks to mention that she sent them because Tommy knows her. As her fireflies leave, she starts to think about a certain person from the past who will be revealed momentarily. After she bids the group farewell, she takes out a photo and touches it while smiling. It takes us a few seconds to see the actual photo, but it turns out to be the same photo that Ellie gave to Joel towards the end of The Last of Us Part 1. It is indeed a photo of Joel and Sarah, which brings up two important questions. Why does she have a photo of Joel and Sarah? And who is she to Joel and Sarah? The group arrives in Austin, Texas. They use the map to guide their way to Joel's house and Ellie's last known whereabouts, assuming she made it there in the first place. They run into a guy named Luis, who lets him stay in his farm for the night before they officially walk to Joel's house. The group notices that many areas of Luis's farm have burned residue, which will serve as a callback to Last of Us Part 1 when Joel, Tommy, and Sarah drove by Luis's farm that was on fire. Abby, Dina, Lev, Anthony, Isabella, and Luis sit in the living room as they think about what to say to Ellie if they find her. How would they convince her to come back with them to the Firefly camp? What will they do if she rejects that invitation? Dina wanted to suggest that they should remind her of Joel's initial goal during Last of Us Part 1, but she realizes that it would only make her angry because it would remind her of the choice that Joel intentionally or otherwise stole from her. They kept bouncing ideas between each other, but nobody said anything that would stick out as the most viable option. The group decides to sleep on it and hope that Ellie, first of all, is okay, and secondly, would make the right decision. The five main characters leave Luis's farm late in the morning and fight their way through the infected. By the time they reach Joel's house, it started to get dark and Abby slowly opens the front door. At that instance, the screen turns to black and you play as Ellie, going back to the first scene of the game after Abby said it will not end like last time. You see Ellie run upstairs and grab her gun. When she comes back downstairs, the scene transforms the living room to the building where Ellie first fought David. The boss fight from The Last of Us Part 1 starts, and you're tasked with the same objective: sneak behind David and attack him without alerting him. Once you try to hit him for the first time, your attack completely misses. Ellie grabs her head as if she has a headache, and the environment transforms to the backstage area of the theater from The Last of Us Part 2. Now you must complete the same objective, but against Abby and Lev. Both of them are against you. When you attempt to attack one person, he or she dodges and disappears. After your second successful attack, the second person goes away, and the environment transforms into complete darkness, with a single spotlight shining on Ellie. The last part of the boss fight asks you to find the quote-unquote assailant in the dark, and win the fight. While you run in the darkness, you hear random voices saying, "Calm down, Ellie, we need your help." Ellie will recognize 3 of the voices, but won't recognize the 4th voice. You ultimately find a shadowy figure and try to deliver the final blow, but you are quickly grabbed from behind by Dina, who embraces Ellie and soothes her. You, as Ellie, struggle at first, but slowly drop your weapon to the floor and cry in Dina's arms. The fight is done, and the screen gradually turns to black. Before you return to the current story, you wake up in the body of a woman that you have never seen in the prior games or Part 3. This woman appears to be pregnant and lays in bed while reading one of the comics from The Last of Us. Suddenly, a man comes into the room and says, "How are you feeling, honey?" The woman says, "I'm doing alright. I could use a drink of water. I feel dehydrated." The man walks to the kitchen and the camera follows him. His phone rings, and based on the conversation that you hear from the man's perspective, the other person is asking the man to do something that neither he nor the woman in his bed would like. The man sprints back to his room and packs his bag with clothes and a couple of guns. When he explains to his wife that he was called for a night shift in the local mall as part of the Firefly group, she voices her discontent by using his first name, Anthony. Now you know that the scenario revolves around Anthony from the core group. After going back and forth, Anthony is walking towards the bedroom door when he turns around and says, "Anna, I asked your friend Marlene to be on call in case you need anything. Make sure to contact her if you need anything, and I mean anything. Anna, with a tear in her eye, smiles as Anthony makes one final remark before the sequence is over. Make sure to keep drinking. I don't want my beautiful wife and our beautiful girl, Ellie, to be dehydrated. After the next scene transition, the camera focuses on Anthony, who hasn't moved an inch since stepping foot in the house and thinking about whether or not Ellie might be his daughter. She sure looks like Anna, his wife. Meanwhile, Dina and Ellie remain embraced on the floor as Abby slowly approaches Ellie without any weapons and asks about her well-being. Ellie explains that she has experienced PTSD nightmares from the moment that Abby killed Joel, and they have not gone away. They have actually become worse, as other terrible events from her past have come to mind from time to time as reminders. When Ellie asks for the reason that Abby, Lev, and Dina are together and came to Joel's house, Anthony steps in and introduces himself and Isabella. He informs Ellie that they are members of a Firefly group out in the Catalina Island, and Marlene has told the camp's leader, Maya, about an immune girl who can help to create a vaccine that could potentially save humanity. Ellie immediately becomes aware of that notion, as it was the exact same idea that Marlene tried to carry out in The Last of Us Part 1. This time, however, Ellie has a choice. Taking turns, Abby, Lev, Dina, and Anthony try to convince Ellie to come with them. Anthony reassures Ellie that the procedure is safe. Abby and Lev ask Ellie to think about the long-term goal of saving other people from becoming infected, and Dina suggests that if Ellie goes through with it, no one else that Ellie loves would have to die from the pandemic. Ellie isn't sure what to do, but she's leaning towards going with the group instead of staying in Joel's house. As a last attempt, Anthony kneels before Ellie, grabs her hand, and begs her to do it for the people that she would consider as family like Dina. Ellie is confused as to why Anthony is very emotional about this whole ordeal, but eventually agrees with the group to go back to the Firefly camp. The group is ready to make their final trip, but Ellie asks the group if she can have a few moments to gather her things from upstairs. When she reaches the end of the stairs, she goes into Sarah's room, where she looks at Sarah's birthday card and starts to weep because she considers Joel as her father. She stares at the card for a few seconds and the light in the room dims. Ellie tries to leave the room, but the door is locked. As soon as she turns around, she stares at something in front of her and drops her bag. Joel stood in front of her and starts a conversation with, "Hey there, kiddo." Ellie rushes to hug Joel, and Joel asks her what's wrong. She's upset because Joel died before they can fully make up from their final deep discussion on the porch in Last of Us Part 2, and now Ellie's prepared to follow suit in Joel's original plan for her. She admits that it was the right decision, but she was angry because Joel took away her ability to make that choice. Joel leans over and says that everything will be alright, and Ellie should do whatever makes her happy. As a final piece of conversation between Ellie and Joel, to make her feel better, Joel tells Ellie one last dad joke. Why did the math book look so sad? Because of all of its problems. Ellie cracks up, and both Joel and Ellie smile at each other. Ellie reaches for her bag and Joel says, "I'll see you around, kiddo." Ellie goes downstairs and everyone notices that she looks happy. She signals that it is time to go and the group is off on the return trip. The last person to leave the house is Anthony, who rubs his right eye and smiles because he saw his daughter smile for the first time today. A flashback happens when you play as Joel. You sit on the couch in your living room with Sarah, his daughter. She's decorating a card that both of them wrote for Mother's Day. Sarah wonders when her mother is coming home, and Joel reassures his daughter and says that she should be home any minute. He goes to the kitchen to take out the Mother's Day cake from the refrigerator when a knock is heard from the front door. Joel asks Sarah to answer, and she runs to the door with the expected level of anticipation and excitement. As Joel's back is facing the front door, he hears, "Hi, there's my little girl." He continues to hear giggling and laughing, and then a purse being placed on the kitchen counter. The woman cracks a joke at Joel's baking, to which he responds with a joke of his own. He faces the woman, but you don't see who is said woman. Joel presents the cake and says, "Happy Mother's Day, hon. I'm a lucky guy to have a woman who is a good wife and an even better mother." The camera pans to the woman, and as she says, "Yes, you are," it is clear that Joel's wife and Sarah's mother is none other than Maya, the leader of the Firefly group. As the group travels back to the Catalina Island, they make one final pit stop in Ciudad Juarez, New Mexico. The group settles down for the night, 3 specific conversations take place one after the other. The first chat is between Lev and Isabella. Lev is checking on Isabella and sees if she's okay after everything that happened to them. Isabella smiles at Lev and looks up to the stars. She points to the North Star and Lev is impressed that she was able to point it out. While both of them look at the stars, Isabella slowly moves her hand closer to Lev's. When they touch, Isabella and Lev look at each other, lean closer, and kiss. Both of them back away really quickly to comprehend what just happened, but they continue to look at the stars while Isabella's head rests on Lev's shoulder. The second talk takes place between Anthony and Dina. Anthony knows that Dina is the closest thing to a family that Ellie has right now. He asks her if she knows anything about what happened to Ellie's parents. She's unsure, but she's also curious as to why Anthony is interested in Ellie's parents. Responding in a whisper, Anthony tells Dina about his deceased wife Anna and how they agreed that their child will be named Ellie. Dina is surprised but also excited. She asks Anthony if there is any way to find out, and he says that he could search for Ellie's file at the camp. When Marlene found Ellie in The Last of Us Part 1, she sent out a file on her to every Firefly camp in case they run into Joel and Ellie in the future. They agreed to this plan and continued their chit-chat. The last verbal exchange took place between Ellie and Abby. Abby approaches Ellie, who was playing a guitar that she found in Joel's house. It seems that Ellie is open to talk with Abby, and Abby starts by thanking her for sparing her and Lev back in Santa Barbara. Ellie puts down the guitar and says the following. I remember when Joel and I had a heart-to-heart conversation like this one. We talked about a lie he told me back when I was captured by the Firefly group in Utah. When I found out about it, I was so angry and it took me so long to forgive him. During our last talk, I decided to do just that. You know, I planned to kill you on the beach. I could have easily killed you while you were tied up by the slavers. Even though I wanted to hurt you, and I did. I could not kill you because of Joel. Not because it wasn't what he wanted me to do, but it was because killing you wouldn't change anything, and I decided to just leave, try to forget about what happened, and start to forgive you. Before it happens though, I have one question. Why did you kill Joel? Why did you travel so far to kill the man who I considered to be my dad? Abby tells Ellie about her dad who worked as a surgeon for the Fireflies and how Joel killed him during her rescue. Ellie asks Abby what would have happened if Joel rescued her but didn't kill her dad. Abby pauses, but then suggests that she would have never come after Joel. Ellie apologizes for what happened to Abby's dad, and Abby apologizes for killing Joel. After a few moments, Ellie picks up the guitar and starts to sing Future Days by Pearl Jam. Abby wonders who taught her this song. Ellie refers to Joel. While Ellie sings the song, the player sees 2 sets of scenes. First, when the camera focuses on Ellie, scenes of Ellie and Joel from The Last of Us Part 1 and 2 appear in slow motion. When the camera focuses on Abby, scenes of Abby and her dad in the zoo appear in slow motion. The song ends after a few minutes and there is a transition to the next scene. As they make their way to the camp, they encounter a final battle against charging zombies, which include normal infected, clickers, stalkers, bloaters, shamblers, lungers, swimmers, and a creature that resembles the Rat King from Part 2. Right before the group reaches the Firefly camp, a cutscene plays out where Tommy arrives to Maya's headquarters. Immediately recognizing him, Maya runs to Tommy and hugs him. They walk to her house and tell amusing stories about what has happened in their lives since they last saw each other prior to the pandemic. After a few moments, the conversation takes a dark turn when the topic of Joel is brought up to the table. Maya asks Tommy if he knows what happened to Joel, and then he proceeds to tell her about Abby. As he tries to explain Abby's version of the story, she interrupts him by asking for her description. Tommy pulls out Abby's picture that Ellie kept from the theater in The Last of Us Part 2. Maya starts to boil. Tommy continues to talk, but the camera slowly zooms in on Maya, who is getting angrier and angrier. We return to present time, and Abby, Ellie, Lev, Anthony, Dina, and Isabella almost make it to the camp. Further steps are taken and a shot is fired from the distance. Ellie and Lev, who were in front of the group, slowly turn around to see Abby on the floor, gasping in agony from a shot to the right shoulder. The group quickly rushes to the camp because they think the shot came from behind them. Unfortunately for them, Maya stands in front of the gates and orders them to stand down and surrender their weapons. Anthony yells at her in confusion, trying to figure out what the hell is going on and who shot Abby. Maya admits that she shot her, and when Ellie demands a reason, Maya signals one of her lieutenants to bring out Tommy. Maya expresses anger by saying that Tommy told her of Abby's deed with Joel, who happens to be her husband. Maya claims that everyone is allowed to come back to the camp, with the exception of Abby. Anthony, being a doctor, says that he cannot leave a wounded human being alone. Lev joins Anthony, stating that under no circumstances would he ever leave Abby's side. As a response, Maya demands that Ellie, Anthony, and Isabella enter the camp. Clearly enraged by Abby's past actions, Maya says that she is willing to spare Tommy if her demands are met. Dina shouts at Maya, saying that her husband killed Abby's father, which led to Abby vengefully killing Joel, similar to how Maya wants to kill Abby now. Maya gives Ellie, Anthony, and Isabella one final chance, and Ellie says that she either takes the whole group inside or none of them. Acting out of grief for the recent revelation, Maya looks down on the ground, raises her head, and executes Tommy. Then she orders her lieutenants and guards to kill Abby, Lev, and Dina, and take everyone else inside. This is the final confrontation in the game. Playing as Ellie, you must survive for 3 minutes while making sure that Abby is kept alive. After 3 minutes, the final piece of the story happens. The shootout continues, but it is clear that Ellie and her group are winning. Maya's forces are dwindling, either by the fight or their disinterest in aiding Maya's desire for vengeance. Ellie asks Dina, Lev, and Isabella to cover Abby, while she goes after Maya. Ellie and Anthony rush to her headquarters and find her sitting in a chair. She's holding a gun in one hand and a picture of her, Joel, and Sarah together. Ellie and Anthony slowly go into the room and confront Maya. She starts to cry out that Joel did not deserve what happened to him, and it would be wise for Ellie and Anthony to leave her alone because she does not want to hurt them. Anthony signals Ellie to stay next to the door and be a lookout, as he approaches Maya and tries to talk some sense into her. He says that she is not the same person he followed for all these years and who saved many lives in her community. He understands her sadness and anger at this moment, but he implores her to think about what she's doing and think about the bigger picture instead of selfishly sacrificing everything that she has done for the group due to revenge. She smiles at Anthony and says, "I know exactly what I'm doing. Thank you." She shoots him in the chest as Ellie quickly pulls out her gun and shoots Maya. The leader of the Fireflies dies instantly, and Anthony lies on the floor in pain. Ellie sprints towards Anthony and yells for anyone to get some help. Anthony brushes Ellie's hair and says, "I'm glad that I get to spend my final moments with my daughter." Without a moment's notice, he stops breathing and dies in Ellie's arms. Ellie is briefly perplexed by his last words, but it doesn't take too long for her to take them as truth and shed tears for her passing father. Dina, Lev, and Isabella run into the room and see what transpired. As the group gathers around Ellie to comfort her because of her loss, Ellie mumbles, What happened to Abby?" Dina responds by saying that she found some doctors who are tending to her right now. Isabella looks for a pencil and a paper in the room and writes to Ellie, "I know that this is a bad time to ask, but now that Maya and Anthony are dead, what do you think about the surgery?" Lev forcefully takes away the paper after Ellie reads Isabella's comment, raising his voice at Isabella and saying that it is not a good time. She starts to tear up because Lev has never raised his voice at her, and Lev hugs her to calm her down. In the meantime, Dina tells Ellie that although Anthony died, there are other doctors here who are willing to perform the procedure. However, they told Dina to tell Ellie that they are not sure about the success rate of the surgery. In fact, they are saying that it will most likely kill her. Dina says that Ellie can take all the time that she needs, but the decision to go or not to go through with the surgery is a choice that only Ellie can make. Dina walks out of the room, followed by Lev and Isabella. The last transition happens and we see Lev and Isabella sit on a bench while some kids run around and play tag against each other. Lev is demonstrating basic American Sign Language, which he learned while going to the school that the Firefly camp offers. As Isabella smiles at Lev, Dina and Abby join and sit on the bench. Lev asks if they're okay, and Dina says, "I will be, thank you." Abby, on the other hand, says that she's still thinking about what Ellie decided to do, and if she was in Ellie's shoes, she would have made the same choice. Their discussion continues until Isabella claims, on a piece of paper, that it is their turn to fish and bring food to the camp. Everyone gets up besides Abby, who says that they can go on and she will catch up. The environment is muted, and as Abby stares at the kids who are playing in front of her, the theme song for The Last of Us Part 1 plays in the background. The music continues to play. Abby gets up a few moments later and starts walking towards the front gate. As the song reaches its ending, the camera pans over to the sky, and the last moment of the game is a depiction of Joel, Tommy, Sarah, and Ellie hugging, smiling, and looking at everyone with content from above. Before we close out the project, I would like to say a word about some recent observations I made on the gaming community. The game's reception was shocking, and the way in which the people who worked on the product have been treated deserves an uncomfortable discussion of some truths. Please keep in mind that the following points are said from a place of love and care. Moreover, I'm saying the following opinions because I want to see a community that is less toxic and more accepting of products and people who take risks. Let us get started. Number 1. Why did a lot of individuals decide to act as if they read 100 books a year and understand what constitutes good storytelling or writing? I watched a YouTube video from XQCOW, and a repeated meme referenced Naughty Dog's latest product as Trash of Us 2. I have never witnessed a majority of a game's player base analyze and dissect a story to this extent. A video by Critical Analysis voices my thoughts perfectly. He says, just because you don't like something or it wasn't what you expected, that doesn't make it, aka the story and writing, objectively bad. There are games with truly horrific writing and storytelling. If you need any proof, read a review on a game called Ride to Hell Retribution. If you think that The Last of Us Part 2's writing is bad, I'm curious to see what you think about my least favorite game of all time. Number 2. Why do some individuals review a video game without beating it? A review of a whole product should require you to beat it. Of course you can give your first impressions of a game, but you must beat the product to accurately critique it with an attached score. Number 3. Why do some individuals assume that watching the leaks tells them everything they need to know about the game? The leaks that were released a few months prior to the game's launch barely touched the surface on the title's plot. Watching something and being able to review it only applies to movies and TV shows. You do not watch games, you play them. Simply watching cutscenes is not the same as playing the title. Number 4. Some individuals are spoiled. Cosmonaut Variety Hour makes a wonderful statement about the idea of choices in video games. He says, and I quote, "We as an audience have become far too comfortable with the idea that our choices are the one thing that matters in video games. Some games really benefit from taking choices away from the player to contextualize the character's role in the world. Video games are a form of art, and it is up to the developers and writers to either share their vision of the narrative or provide a choice to the players. The last course of action you want to take is signing a change.org petition, which is real, as it will depict you like that 4-year-old kid who cries because he or she did not receive what he or she wanted for his or her birthday. Number 5. Some individuals have double standards. On a small scale, certain complaints are brought up in Part 2 that happened in Part 1, but are never addressed. In Upper Echelon Gamer's YouTube video, he points out that human opponents do not notice your NPC allies. Why was it not a big deal in his review of Part 1? I can only make assumptions about that matter. With that being said, I can comment on larger scale double standards when it comes to Abby's hatred. It has been noted several times during this video. When we analyze Part 2 as a whole, there are some clear similarities between Abby and Ellie. They both had father figures. They both went on a revenge quest. Both father figures were killed. They both lost friends along the way. They both lost a lot at the end. They both had to learn to forgive. It is true that we have grown attached to Ellie from the first game, but why is Abby absolutely despised when she's staunchly identical to her antagonist? The answer may relate to my final opinion on the gaming community. Number 6. Some individuals take characters too seriously. I will not go into detail about this issue, but it must be addressed. Shortly after the game's launch, Laura Bailey, who portrayed Abby in The Last of Us Part 2, received death threats from people who were angry because Abby killed Joel. They threatened her as well as her child. If you're upset by any aspect of a video game to the point that you send death threats to the person you think is responsible for your hurt feelings, allow me to enlighten you on a fact. You need psychological help. Attacking Laura, and especially her kid, for following Neil's and Haley's vision is disgusting, appalling, and despicable. If you want my honest take on this topic, I wholeheartedly believe that these individuals do not deserve to play another video game in their lives. When the dust settles, The Last of Us Part 2 is an incredible product per Naughty Dog standards. The gameplay substantially improves from Part 1, as well as the visuals, sound design, and voice performances. The story engrossed me from start to finish, and I cannot wait for what is in store for the next step in The Last of Us's lore. At this point, I would like to thank everyone who was involved in the product, primarily for taking risks and telling us their vision for Ellie's and Joel's next adventure. I would particularly like to thank Neil Druckmann and Haley Gross for a well-written tale, as well as Troy Baker, Ashley Johnson, and Laura Bailey for displaying their credentials as some of the best voice actors in the business. Lastly, I want to thank you guys for sticking by me and listening to my take on The Last of Us Part 2 and the series in general. I hope that you understand my point of view, and if by some chance you disagree with my take on the title, we can do as I said in the beginning of the project. Agree to disagree. Thank you for watching the video. Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Till next time, have a great day or evening wherever you are. My name is AES, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.